Hey, coming to you live from America's Stonehenge. Hello, everyone.
Hey, everybody.
We have been doing a lot of exploring. We have been filming a lot. We're also here with Michael from DarkHour.
Hello, hello.
You are currently hearing from him behind the camera, but he might slink over here in front of the camera too. So it's Thursday night. It's not 7. Sorry. But here we are.
But we're from this beautiful location, so no complaints.
Yeah. We've talked a lot about sites that are thousands of years old. There's indications at this site that there are campfires that were here 7,000 and 9,000 years ago plus. They were along walls that are not dissimilar to the constructions behind us. We were at the Upton
chamber.
We're not going to call it a cave because apparently it's described as a cave, even though it is a completely stone-built structure, exactly like how we're looking.
But, for the record here, where are we exactly?
Oh, that's a good question.
We are in America's Stonehenge in Salem, New Hampshire.
Where is Dora the Explorer? Right here. We are coming to you live generously because of Dennis Stone's opening and welcoming us to this site. We've been here before. I did a lecture here it wasn't 2 years ago. It was only a year and a half. Michael and I were here. We are going to be doing that again. I will be lecturing on September 24th, so stay tuned for more info on that. And I don't know. This is, Michael and I have both been here. We need to get Lynn's opinion on the site. What do you think so far?
I think it's absolutely fascinating. Well, we've been talking about how there have been some restorations, so that's definitely part of the difficulty here in the site is knowing what was original and what wasn't. But it's incredible. I've been here. I actually used to live about 10 minutes from here, so I've been here quite a few times. But I mean, even the stonework behind us, you can see these stones are huge, and I don't know if it's going to really show on camera just how big some of these stones are, and they are roofs.
Here, let me give you perspective real quickly. I'm about 5'6". I'm gonna stand against this.
If you guys heard that wrong, he just said he was 6'11".
So you can see this is taller than I am.
Yeah.
Quite the slab, weighing many megatons, and if that's a go tons.
Yes.
There are many around the site that are just like this, or collapsed. Perhaps I did stand.
For the sake of perspective and for what you guys can hear off a camera phone, I'm going to have him repeat all that as you get closer.
Once again, for clarity, these stones are erected all around this particular site. Some of them collapsed, some of them still standing, and they definitely vary in size. But one of the consistencies is that they are at least part of the structure, or they are aligned in some sort of celestial fashion. And again, this is one of the characteristics that really defines America's Stonehenge and many sites, over 800 in the Northeast alone, that we can sit and talk about right now. Again, this is something that defines these sites within this area.
And absolutely, the construction of the walls that are here, you can sort of see behind us. Anyone who's been to New England and seen the colonial walls that the farmers had built, it's a very, very different type of construction. This is a much tighter assembly of rocks. Yes, is a better way to describe it. It's definitely a sturdier build. It's not like a lot of the colonial walls are just rocks kind of built on top of each other, thrown on top of each other, which is why we see half of them crumbling these days. But this is incredible. There are shims that hold the rocks together. It's a tight construction. It's absolutely a different type of architecture.
Now, one of the reasons that we're coming back and revisiting America's Stonehenge already, we've comprehensively covered it to a certain degree. This is obviously an ongoing project. Jared, can you talk to us a little bit about the OSL dating that has been done here, perhaps some of the LiDAR scanning that's occurred since we've been here a year and a half ago, and why this is significant looking at those practices?
The biggest thing that Dennis had been talking to us, the minute we showed up, we've been filming all over here for a week. Not just here at America's Stonehenge, but all over. And Dennis has been working with a group that has done OSL dating, not just here. What's most significant, it's comparing multiple sites. So one of the things I think they're hoping to find, and there isn't dating back yet because it's complex. You can get false reads. So they currently are analyzing the data, and currently that includes not just America's Stonehenge. They have done stuff at the Upton Knot Cave. And I'm going to say that because when you guys go to look it up, they describe it. I was infuriated to find out they described it as a cave.
In one art, but still, regardless.
Yes, she's reading while we're driving back to the site, and they kept saying it's a cave, but a definitely man-made cave.
Right.
It's not a cave. There's nothing cave about it.
They also claimed it was the largest cave in New England,
By
which is
definition,
clearly not true.
Oh, they also, yes, they described it as an actual cave, the largest cave.
So we won't cite this article for people's reference. We're going to ask them to look up the Upton Chamber. You will find that I think it's Upton Historical Park or something along those lines.
Yeah, it's an odd thing. If you guys do go, it is free and it is not well labeled, and it is directly within 100 feet of where you park your car. Good luck finding it. We will try to describe that in some of our upcoming videos from the footage we did. We'll put out some shorts. We're going to put out a couple documentaries. But the OSL dating that was done there at that site, here at America's Stonehenge in multiple locations, they've done 3 here. And the idea is to tie them together and maybe be able to say that some of these stacked stones that you're seeing behind us match some of these other constructions. And there's a lot of significance to that. So they're not saying it's a single culture, but it's possibly a single culture or a period of time where people are using a similar construction method and they just live in a similar area. So that's the most important thing about the OSL dating. The thing is we don't have all of it back yet. And I know Michael's watching comments. So if you guys have any questions or comments, Michael will read them off.
I will say one thing very quickly. Enzo Chiral asks, was that particular structure rebuilt, or is it as it was originally? Now, Lynn had mentioned very briefly that there have been, many different designs on top of this area. We can talk about the different purported cultures that have been here. Gregorian monks, you have Vikings, you have Native
Irish
Americans,
monks.
Irish monks. You have all of these different groups of people utilizing the site for different reasons. And of course, this particular place we know was quarried one time in the recent, I think it's 200 years or so. So within that time, things being shifted around, it's very difficult to say where a placement originally may have lain, but we can say with certainty that many of the stones that are here are more than likely of the original construct. However, they've been sort of Tetrised around.
That's possible. That's always a blurred line as to how to deconstruct the history of repair of a site that's been utilized. Humans have some very interesting characteristics about how they treat a site similarly. Drainage, water. There are some ways in which it may have overlapped for thousands of years. There's running fountains in Italy and other places that were used by the Romans. There's aqueducts that, of course, for all of you out there for conspiracy standpoint, there's some theories that the aqueducts date back to the Etruscans and i.e. Tartaria. So there is a lot of stacking of even actually just off screen, there are actually 3 drill marks that are described as a technique in the 1700s. So you have quarrying going back very, very much to early colonial settlement. You have a hill, and is it on screen? Because I can't see. Are there trees also? Can people see the trees?
To some degree.
Okay. Well, we talked about this before. This entire, we're on what is really a shaved down mountaintop due to glacial kind of deconstruction. Glaciers came through, and we're right in the heart of what would have been one of the areas that they considered was this mile-high ice sheet. It was almost a central park of what would be a great lake of water that during a younger driest period, if there was a great catastrophe where that lake emptied, it would be, we're really at ground zero maybe for underneath of where the biblical flood could have started. But the occupation here dates, there is a wall, just one wall, and along this one wall, and it looks like it could be colonial, but it isn't, because the fires that were there were definitely dated independently to over 7,000 and over 9,000 years. So there's clearly human occupation for a long period. And remodeling a structure, repairing it, or using it for a different purpose. And these trees that I was about to mention, they're less than 100, 120, 130 years old are these trees. So there was nothing up here. But then a group could have used these stone structures, felled all the trees, made what this could have been is we're looking at foundational structures. Oh, this could be the subfloor to a basement. We could be looking at a larger wood construction that is, gone, buried, or, burned and borrowed for other constructions. And then all that was left was the stone. That's something that could have happened over and over in a cycle of 9,000 years. I mean, it only took 100-something years for these trees to be here, but it could have been all burned out. The suspicion that Dennis spoke about was that the entire valley that's off to our right, that would be that way where I'm pointing. But the other side of this mountain was entirely an open valley for grazing that indigenous cultures actually burned themselves.
Now, we know that there was at least 2 fireplaces on this property that was dated back to, what did we say, 9 to 12,000
fire pits.
Fire pits.
Yeah, 7 and 9,000 plus.
What, with that being said, what, at least within our current knowledge, what is the oldest artifact or part of this site that we have dated within, America's Stonehenge?
The oldest objects are the stones, and we, other than OSL dating, which isn't complete, of the work that's been done. They've gotten OSL dates out of some things. That one of the numbers that Dennis had was 1,600 years. The problem is that OSL, depending on when the stone last saw light, is going to change that number. So say you had a wall that was, and this is always the hardest part of archaeology, I think, is that, or reconstructing anything that's been around. Well, what if the 20,000-year-old little dolmen fell over and 9,000 years ago they stacked it in a different wall? So if one side of that hadn't seen light for 15,000 or 18,000 years or whatever, and now it's in the middle of the light as they roll it and hump it up into a new wall, that's graphic for everyone. Well, then it's going to have a different OSL date.
Do you want to explain for those that aren't familiar what OSL is?
Optical stimulus luminescence. It sounds cool. It is cool. It's when light, so they can literally take a single grain out of a rock, and they can actually date and tell you to some degree of accuracy when there was light on it last. And so it gets abbreviated to OSL. Then you have LIDAR. So you have, and all that can do is take away the organics and show you stone, which is great. You have a site here. Since we were here and I did that lecture almost 2 years ago, the problem is they need to manage the trees that are destroying the structures and the walls and what could be snake effigies. So this all goes into the serpent mound. A lot of you guys might know about serpent mound, says the witch.
Yes. So there's serpent walls,
Yeah.
which are fascinating. So basically, there was one. Was it out here that looks like the undulating serpent, or was that?
Yeah. No, there's a few.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's absolutely fascinating. So it has a giant head, this boulder, and then the wall is built to look like the serpent's body, kind of coming out of it. It's absolutely fascinating.
And this is something that we've observed at many other sites too. This isn't simply indicative of America's Stonehenge, which also raises the implication of what cultures may have traversed this land. Perhaps some of this was built at one period of time. Somebody came on again and added to this in a cumulative effect. Again, kind of leaving their imprint, their signature, their culture here within the site for us to decipher and pull apart as the puzzle as a whole is certainly comprised of many of these moving parts.
Yeah. I guess we could talk a little bit about, the hill we were on. Mm-hmm. Michael and I did look at, this is going to be included in what collectively the three of us will be doing with some more organized documentary style footage, which we'll put together for you guys in more of a show format. But in just investigating, there's a common statement that's made that there's about 800 sites from Canada to the U.S. in this area that look like some variation of Stonehenge here. And we were able to traverse some of those. Besides the Upton Chamber, we made it into Connecticut, and we were told there was hundreds of cairns just on one hill, and that there were thousands, tens of thousands, maybe over 10,000 just near Lyme, which is where Lyme's disease was named. I guess the town's very proud. I've only recently found that out, that they are not tremendously thrilled.
And this came from Plum Island, New York, which was right across the Long Island Sound, a biological testing spot, still active today. I believe they're attempting to move it out to Ohio within the next 4, 6 years, something along those lines. But many of the diseases that we have today, even going back to certain strains of SARS, of course, he mentions Lyme disease, these all came from one avenue or another from that particular island. Whether it was traipsed out on somebody's foot or released intentionally, I really couldn't tell you.
Now, for the sake of both of our streaming services, all I'm going to say is, when are any of you aware of any biological agents coming out of a biological experimental lab? Anyway, moving on.
Mm-hmm. Plant the seed, right? Well,
Thanks,
it's already
government.
grown.
Well, you know what? It's actually interesting too. As part of this, not to do anything with biological
Entities.
yes, but having
Devil
to
be
do with our
gone.
government. Part of the problem that we have with this site is, as you were talking about the quarry,
Yeah.
because there was a taxation. There was taxation on the stone. If it was quarried from the ground, they got taxed. And so here they are, surrounded by tons of stones that are already quarried. There's no tax on it.
Yep. So
So-
how much of this gets taken away
Right.
just because it's available for someone to build a foundation?
Right.
That there is that.
Don't mind the gunfire in the background.
Yes.
Cannon to me.
Yeah, it did.
Colonial reenactment.
Yes, exactly.
If you guys didn't hear that, somebody did just fire a larger caliber weapon or a very small sunset cannon.
It's okay. We're blocked behind the
Yeah.
stone wall.
We are in a good spot
We're
as
in a
long as it's not
fortress.
artillery.
Fortified.
Yeah. think
Are
so.
we getting any comments that we need to talk about? Can they? All right, good. Everybody can hear us, I'm hoping.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah. All right.
So one thing that we could talk about too that we haven't mentioned, one of the reasons why this is called America's Stonehenge is there is an actual henge here that does have celestial alignments as well. And we just had the summer solstice. There are different stones that are lined up with the solstice, the equinox, and I think the quarter days as well.
Which some of us were up here for. It was very early. And
Some of us are very bitter about it.
Uh-huh.
I don't like
That's what you
mornings.
get for being ambitious.
Yeah. Someone had to get the footage.
Someone had to go into the
I see where you're
chamber.
going.
Well, now see, the interesting thing is this is a different celestial event. The last time we were here, Jared, it was Beltane. And we were actually here that night.
That's
it was
true.
a Saturday night, I think I recall. Just very curious that, I mean, personally, I didn't plan it that way. Maybe you had something in mind.
We did.
The first time around.
Yeah, because Dennis had done an interview with me, and we were invited out, and he said, "Look, if you want to come for the event, I'll let you in, and you guys can spend the night here as an observation." So,
It seems that Jared was a bit more privy to the plan than I was. I had no idea until I got out here that it was Beltane. I obviously wasn't watching the dates, but nonetheless, pretty cool to be here on those specific celestial events because we do get to observe, as Jared mentioned yesterday. What was it, yesterday? No, Tuesday, 4 o'clock in the morning. He's out here taking pictures of that sun going right up the pinnacle of one of the dolmens. And sure enough, you can see that it is very much aligned.
I think it's great now for street cred that everyone knows that Michael's was really like, Michael, we need to go somewhere with moonlight. Okay, I'm in. He brought equipment. He brought everything. It didn't actually. It literally started raining on cue, like movie rain, when we showed up. It was fine until we showed up. Then it rained.
Nice. Well, Jared
Yep.
brings the wonderful weather.
We didn't stop. We kept going.
Yeah.
Pros. You're pros.
We are in Salem, New Hampshire, and I would like to point out that despite somebody saying that they're from around here, the weather is relatively very movie. I would say Twilight vampire-y. And I'm not even saying that as a fan, but if you like semi-chilled, almost late fall weather, right now we've had 60s and 70s with a pretty strong breeze.
The other day when we were here, though, it was lovely. It was in like the low 80s, I think.
There was one nice day on the east side here, y'all.
Well, they happen.
But hey, you could be in Florida or Texas with like 120-degree heat.
Very true.
And tonight we're quite lucky. Everything is quite mild. Sun is setting over, just over my left shoulder and their right. Very, very gorgeous place to just kind of traverse through. And even the energy here is sort of, I don't know, for myself, I walk into it initially, I feel like I have to adjust to it. So it's sort of buzzy and a little discomforting, but as I spend about 10, 15, 20 minutes in here, all of a sudden it becomes very calming, subduing, and relaxing. And that's something that I experienced the first time I came here too, for those of you who are sensitive out there and care to know.
Actually, so we came here at night. Michael and I had not been up to the site before, and he hit the entrance to the, I mean, we talked about it back then, but you could remind everybody your immediate sense of the chamber from the wrong side.
Do you want to come over here and talk on camera since you're talking?
Is there room for us?
No, that's okay. I'm playing producer
sure?
over here. You guys can hear me, and those of you who know me recognize my voice. So this is a story that some of you will be familiar with. When Jared and I first traversed these grounds, I did have my two kids with me. One is 6 and one is 9. And at that time, I was just walking around with the Osmo and camera working, filming B-roll, and wasn't terribly familiar with the layout of the site. And this is sort of my way of exploring it. As I started walking into the Oracle Chamber naturally, because that was where the path was taking me, I was immediately hit with a very thick wall of, maybe it was an energy, but the air itself was just incredibly heavy and hit me directly in the chest. It felt as if there was some resistance. In the very back of the chamber, everything seemed much darker than it normally should, given the small amount of light that was still around within the camera, or the sun that had been going down at the time. I could see what appeared to be a very large figure, maybe 8-10 feet tall. And the way that I described this to Lynn earlier, it sort of maybe had some sort of Viking outcroppings on the head area. I certainly don't think this is indicative of the spirit itself, whatever it was. I think it might have just been a representation in respect to the image, possibly reflecting, a culture that had called it in and been utilized at that time. But again, these are just conjecture that I'm throwing out with that. With this in mind, I didn't want to enter the chamber. I felt very uneasy to do so, so I backed out slowly, saying to myself, wow, there's a field of energy here. It does not want me to pass. I did call my daughter over, and I said, hey, check this out. I want to show you one of these constructs. And she stuck her head in and very quickly moved back, said, I don't like it in there. And she was feeling the exact same thing. What I've come to ascertain through that experience is that there are certain sites that hold, especially ancient sites, that hold what we know as a watcher spirit. And what happens with that is that there's a specific energy that's non-human, but certainly protects the area and possibly doesn't have anything to do with the site itself, but it might be the surrounding land. But nonetheless, it finds itself ensconced within these sites, and the presence is very tactile when they show up. Now, this did dissipate for me as soon as Dennis, the curator of this America Stonehenge, did come and kind of give us a guided tour. And my thought was that my energy was something unfamiliar, and we didn't necessarily make any etheric principles or statements or intentions, out there before we decided to come to the grounds. And sometimes that does make a difference. You're more welcomed than catching them by surprise, we'll say. And that's sort of what it felt like. So when Dennis, his energy, who is so familiar, his legacy, and his family, who has been attempting to preserve the site and do something very beneficial in way of keeping this around, entered the site with us, I felt that maybe we were now affiliated with that energy, and whatever was watching tended to relax. And I haven't had any experience in this site like that since.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you, so since you kind of had that introduction with Dennis to the site, has it been more of a welcoming feel to you?
Absolutely. In fact, as soon as Dennis came on site with us, that's when I started to experience the peace end of things that I was describing there. Even today, coming on, I felt a little bit of that buzz, and it was somewhere off to my left behind the camera here where I started to feel that deep pocket of serenity, and that sort of washes over and takes through. And it's conflicting too, because you're like, why did I feel so weird one moment ago, and all of a sudden I feel like I just came out of a meditative trance? Yeah. But it's certainly here, and you can certainly experience it.
was the Denisification of the site. Similar to
Yeah, there's a plaque for him
Denisovan,
somewhere within the stones.
like Denisovan, but less Neanderthal-y and
Definitely paleo.
oh, Denisovan.
Mhm.
Yeah. What was it like the next time? I mean, as far as being here now, then, do you think that there's been any change between the event we were here for before and now?
I think that this type of site holds cyclical experience. So these things that were probably going on energetically prior to human involvement or even acknowledgement, and they will continue to do that. I think why we're sitting here is because humans did catch wind of this at some point, realize the significance, and then created something around that idea. Beyond that, I don't see anything in respect to the change of energy. It's just as strong and as grounded and familiar as the last time we were here.
One of the things that was asked earlier, and let me know if there's any other questions.
I'm looking forward.
I just assumed that, by the way, so yeah, Michael's doing a great job managing all this. I just assumed that on occasion, since he's behind camera, he's busy texting.
No, I'm watching the
whatever,
show and responding
and then
in there, yeah.
Totally joking. I knew he was doing that. But for all of you watching, you're like, okay, well, how many different times has this place been adapted? There's one thing to me that indicates that there is something older and definitely more mysterious. Irrelevant to the carbon dating, there's actually a stone behind us. There's the one that Michael went up and stood in front of, which is very big. But there's another one. Actually, there are many, just like the Upton chamber. There are many here, including the sounding chamber next to the sacrificial altar, which also could be the soap processing stone, the cold stone of 9,000 years ago. But there are stones here that are well over 100 tons, according to Dennis. At a minimum, some of them here, there's one behind us. You have 125 to 140 pounds per square foot. And some of the pieces that have been cut, they've been quarried, cut, and then stacked into this system. If you're going to cut stone and sell it, you aren't going to make a fancy table out of it. Somebody at some point decided to actually cut stone, and either for ritual or just this is what they could work with, they cut, and it doesn't have the 1700s drill marks on it. And if this was an extensive quarry that many years ago, there would still be corresponding even old drill marks or pound marks from the 1700s. It's not extensive at this site, and there has been many, many years of archaeology. So, and these giant stone platforms that are, if not 100 something, they're at least a few tons, and they're put in ways where they make no sense for a local farmer to put that effort in.
Right. Plus, there is an extensive drain system here, so this was not a primitive culture that did this. They had a good understanding of what they were doing and how they were doing it.
They understood plumbing.
Yeah,
absolutely.
The stone toilet is around back. It's been
Still
cold
called
at
the
night,
throne?
but yeah.
Water goes down, smell comes up, payday Friday. Plumbers have not changed their job in thousands of years. She liked that. We're trying to keep it cool for you because she knows what I'm like off camera now.
I had to keep myself laughing earlier about something I just thought of that we had said.
Really?
Had nothing to do with anything we were talking about.
Really?
Yeah.
Was it something not worth sharing on camera? Probably.
It was the butt trumpet.
Yeah.
Do I beatbox now or after?
You don't.
We're in the middle of the show. I think I should do it at the end. Credits, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Michael's sitting on a stone slab, and does he have a flapper for us at the end of this show? You can interpret what that might be. Yeah.
You understand Newtonian physics.
Yep. For every force, there's an equal and opposite reaction.
Yeah, I don't know how high I'll get off the stone, but we'll give it a best go.
Right.
Perhaps something
magic.
that
magic of the stones. Michael will levitate.
Something that's just on the tip of your fingers.
Then my finger.
Yes.
So
you were saying.
Yes.
No, but I will.
Good.
and looking at a place like this, Jared, in your most educated opinion, why were, so many civilizations so seemingly involved with celestial events, and yet today, maybe we talk about them, we find them fascinating, but we simply don't let them, guide us in life. Why do you think some of these cultures of ancient past really held them in such high regard?
There's a couple of fun answers. One, for all you paleoanthropologists, anthropologists, and just general people who are interested in primitive cultures. And I say primitive because I think that there's always stories we tell ourselves, allegories we make. I think every layer of humanity has their version of Disney, has their version of Fox, has their version of just something to teach morals, ethics, name it, philosophy. They have their own stories of their own star systems. That's one layer, and why people are involved with that. But then there's another layer, which is we have solid indication that there were more advanced humans, us, way more conscious, way more functional, way more, I don't know, engaged in engineering with biotechnology. And simultaneously, like we have today, we have tribes. There are tribes all around the earth that seem to congruently lie alongside some. Now they might not be contacted. There's a few, or every now and then everyone will see a news story that says uncontacted tribe. Well, for the most part, we're not running in there and bringing them new iPhones every season. There's many tribes that live in indigenous, in ways that haven't changed in thousands of years. They don't really interact. They might have some modern technology, or you might see them in a t-shirt in some shows. But the reality is they're living very primitively, but they're living alongside us. So where all this becomes most fascinating, this is one of the things that these shows and forevermore, why, track back to this show, point people back to it. This dialogue is about, at what point did a very advanced one, let's just say the last time a very advanced civilization fell, understanding if there are 800 sites just in Canada and North America and around here, that these are the primitive sites. Are they on top of what was once advanced sites? Are they alongside the more advanced sites? Are these ancient sites pointing, a parallel line? There's so many miles apart from the more advanced. Are they mimicking in those stars, charts, and systems something they saw from a more advanced culture? Are they the remnants of that advanced culture? So the reality is that we are only starting to scratch at the surface with Göbekli Tepe. Other tepes, there's 6, and they were all almost as old. Quran and the others that I know Göbekli is the go-to word, but the reality is that we have cultures and things here like the Galt archaeological site that I just went to a month ago, and that's part of this research here. Galt has a stone floor, and according to the founders, human occupation, including this stone floor, which dates to 20,000 years ago. Beyond that, we've discussed way at Laco, Mexico, that Virginia Steen McIntyre and her geologists dated, that Michael Kremos talked about in Forbidden Archaeology. That dates to, originally they dated it 270 to 350,000 plus years old. Refinements on that have put it back even further. So we have not just cyclical cycles of 26,000 years, which is a great legend and tradition. We like to say that the ebb and flow of humanity goes up and down, but what if it's more complex? And these sites, it's very difficult for us to even get our heads around the fact that we're looking at, is it one continuous from the Younger Dryas, from the biblical flood? So are we looking at stone stacking from 9,000 years that backs up against a Younger Dryas and says, okay, well, before that it was a mile under ice, but then what was it after Mount Toba went off? Was it still occupied? Was it in ruins? Did all the animals that died out around 13,000 years ago? A lot of people don't know this, but the camel came from North America. We are in the land of camels. They are not from Egypt. Camels. You're looking around at camel paddocks.
They're wild camels here.
Or the short-faced bear. There was a number of other animals that are from here. Yeah. Comments?
No, you pretty much covered quite a bit there. But what you're saying, at least initially within your explanation there, is that it's not aliens, it's us, right?
Oh, there's a good plug for the book that will be coming out. The sequel, the color version of Not Aliens, will be part of the America's Stonehenge lecture that I'll be doing here on the 24th of September. And that will be available by that date. And it will be the new updated version. So don't go be looking for the old version and buying it. Not worth it. Don't do it. I mean, it's worth it, but wait for the new one.
Now, a big draw to America's Stonehenge in particular is the sacrificial altar or the table that's here. Now, what this apparently, well, let's put it this way. There are many theories that are put forth as to what this could have been used for. You mentioned, live production, soap. We can talk about certain sacrifice. We can talk about a bleeding table for game. Jared, what are your thoughts behind that officially? I mean, are we looking at something that could have a malevolent existence to it, or are we looking at something more benign based on what you've seen within your travels and your research? Coming up against what we have here, what are your thoughts?
I think every time we label something, it's hard to get it out of our head. So you want it to be a moon temple? It's hard not to look at the old Apple store and see, Home Depot. You don't see that when it's the sun temple. It's hard not to look at it sacrificially. And then the problem is we have periods of time where it was maybe looked at as a center of power, which seems to be a human tradition in the last, if we look at the Mayans, the Olmecs, the Toltecs, and we look at all the rest of them and into Europe, there's a lot of power and control with religion. So it's easy to take old technology when you have large megalithic with ruins that have been repaired with stuff like you see behind us. And then you have a culture that's walking up 1,000 steps to lop a head off or pull a heart out. It's hard not to see the moon temple or the sun temple. So officially, I don't really think the sacrificial table, I mean, that's going to get you more interested, right? Versus me telling you it's ancient cold stone and they made ice cream there and that's where they all hug. Say, not badass. No, nobody wants that.
Nope. Soap making table doesn't sound appealing.
Yep. If it's really the Bath and Body of its day, it's, everybody knows to come to Soap Hill. Doesn't sound as interesting as, the Vikings with the antlers and the, the sacrificial table. That sounds way better than, I want something blueberry flavored, Mom. I like the soap from last season, from the equinox.
Now, walking through this site and many others just like it, we look at the Oracle Chamber, and this is a clear passageway through. There's essentially, some sort of L shape to this, although extends itself a little bit to where the sacrificial quote-unquote table lay. It's known as the Oracle Chamber because it does have auditory architecture that goes along to it. There was a tube at one point that, somebody would be in the chamber speaking out underneath this table, which again, raises certain questions as to what this might actually be. In other cases, have you found there to be a similar structure where there was an auditory component? And if you have, how does that, again, compare to what we have here in America's Stonehenge with the Oracle Chamber?
I'm thinking of some of the beehive type structures that are on the islands in Sardinia. Malta. I mean, there's lots of spaces that are archaeoacoustics in general. I mean, yeah, there's acoustics to the chamber, but there's the other thing is, was there a primitive mud finish? Was there like a primitive plaster on the walls? We're looking at this thinking, again, whenever we find something from ancient times, we're like, oh, it looked like that. Yep, they patinaed it right away, like restoration hardware, put some aging on it, now it looks like an old Corinthian column. When we know even the Minoans, everything's bright colored, everything's plastered, everything's got a really cool paint on it. And so, again, it's really fascinating to look at some of what we're looking at and assume that the earliest users of the site could just stack stone. Mind you, that's after developing the skill set even primitively to actually score the they're actually scoring the stone out. That's not low tech entirely to cut the stone out. So were they cutting the stone out? And again, we're looking at what looks like, for those that don't know anything about arbor work of any kind, I mean, it looks like, oh, this is a forest. And when you start looking at it, it's like, wow, there's not a tree here that's less than, it's not more than 140, 130 years max. So again, are we looking at the foundations of larger structures of something else and not nothing really hugely complex, but maybe a one story, this is a stone base and above it was a wood home. And this was finished with something. We're not seeing indications of something complex, but even the Inca, they said the gods built the more complex stuff, but they were using a mortar. The Inca were doing it, and of course that a lot of that mortar remains. But the credit for that is that they said that they did it in the last, like they built everything in the last 1400, 1600 years, and that's just not realistic. But okay, maybe they did. I mean, we're talking about the large megalithic work that they said the gods built, along with all the smaller stonework that they did. And in this case, it's like, yeah, okay, there's a big chamber behind us that has a lot of dirt and soil, and it doesn't appear to ever have been packed. And I don't know, maybe they didn't come through with an ancient power washer and clear it all out. But
well, no, go ahead.
I was just going to say, speaking of the Oracle Chamber, I'm curious as to what both of you think it is, because I know I have my impressions of it. But again, it's similar to the sacrificial table, right? It has a name already. But going into it, what are your impressions of that space?
It's cool, Michael.
Well, Jared, you are absolutely correct. It's very cool in there, figuratively and literally. Again, it's really kind of anybody's guess, and you'd have to really understand the cultures and perhaps their intentions, their aims, the way they live, and their belief system, their ideology, and so forth, to really get a grasp on what some of these structures are. Now, even in the modern day, we do build things based on our own ideologies, whether they be a statue or a building. We've definitely intertwined that somewhere in there. And I think it was a much more serious affair for ancient cultures to, be living this. It was an everyday type of worship. So they would build their societies around, again, these ideologies that they held. The oracle chamber that we have here, I see different piths and ledgings that could have been used for, some sort of small cooking fires. Perhaps they were used for some sort of light storage of, dried goods, fruits, things that were going to be lasting throughout the winter. Although I don't think, by and large, there was enough space to really do that within some of these nooks. There is one point in the oracle chamber that we'd kind of seen earlier today at the, I think it's the Western Open, where if you're looking down towards the ground and you're following the stone as it goes in, it goes much further back than, we could even see with our lights. So this is sort of indicative of perhaps, again, the soil settling over a certain amount of time. You have other debris in there that's accumulated. Perhaps this went down much further and there are other cavernous areas that are now just filled in and, unable to be excavated because, certain permissions won't be granted to do so. This is certainly where LiDAR scanning and other technology like this comes into a certain usage, I'll say lightly, because we can actually rely on some of those graphings to ascertain what it is underneath these areas without being invasive to the archaeology that's still present. So, again, to get back to your original question, what do I think it is? I think it was probably utilized for many different things. Why it was originally built may actually be lost to time in that culture that, again, had put the significance within the structure to build it in the first place.
What did you think?
To me, I got the feeling that it was more of a residential dwelling. I didn't necessarily think it was a ritual space per se, as one might think of with an actual oracle chamber. It just didn't have that feel to it. And there are all of these little, it's interesting you talked about the niches too, like that were in it, Michael, because one of the things that I've noticed all around here, and I don't know if there's not too many behind us, but there are all these little niches all over the place here. And it makes me curious as to what all of these were used for. Some, of course, could be used for fire, but for shelter for fire or a hearth of some sort. But why so many? I'm not quite sure. I guess my imagination going.
Well, even if that was the case and you had, a couple people laying in that one, couple people laying in that one, I mean, in total, with what we can see right here immediately, not, obviously taking in the 100 plus some odd acres that are, still yet to be excavated on this land. I mean, it wouldn't encompass many people. It wouldn't house that many folks in here to stay dry and warm throughout whatever inclement temperature. Speaking of temperature, welcome to the show asks, are acoustics affected by temperature? Welcome to the show. Good to see you, my friend, number one. And absolutely, they are affected by temperature. Just as material is as well, acoustics are essentially forming to the environment around it, the resonance of the material. And if the material itself is affected by temperature, you can definitely bet the acoustics will be augmented as well.
Ironically, we're outside right now, and we're about 4 feet from the camera. Michael's, of course, right there. But if the sounds actually pretty good, is we are actually on the top of a shaved down mountain, which is actually granite. I mean, we're on granite. We're sitting on granite. There's granite around us on every side. So I think we actually picked a really good place to probably talk to everyone, because it sounds like we're inside a room.
It does. Well, what you guys can't see probably, so you have the granite behind us or the walls behind us, but there are walls on either side of us as well. And then partially what would be in front of us behind Michael. So we're almost enclosed in what would be similar to something like a room here. It's incredible.
Yeah. And it's pretty smart where this is built. It's on the back side. It's not on top of the hill. It's on the back side. So if you were in extreme weather, and we were here actually when Michael and I were here, there must have been 35-mile-an-hour plus winds.
Yeah.
And it was significant. You could lean into the wind if you were on top of this hill, which looks into a valley that has a span, according to Dennis, at least 20 miles. Ironically, not very far from the Tic Tac colonel who flew for the Tic Tac. That is, he is a neighbor to America's Stonehenge across this valley. So it's a small world around here.
But that's another interesting aspect of this too, is that it is up on the hill. So when you're looking, you can see all the way down into the valley. It's a vantage point.
Yeah, and that was one of the things I talked about with Dennis. Michael and I talked to him. We were out looking around, and the chance of you, given that the indigenous, they know there was he said 2,000 or 3,000 years that they think they kept trees out of this valley and area and kept it strictly grazing land. So that means that your ability to contact through fire, I don't think really, sound would cover it, but you could visually communicate between hilltops. I mean, you could get a message somewhere pretty fast.
Absolutely.
So there's that.
It's a fascinating place. Oh, and then there was that one stone that was near the oracle chamber, the round one. We found that, like, when you hit it,
it does have a sound quality.
It does.
Found a round stone. It's flat. It looks like a plate, and it's quite specifically placed. It's not in this section, but it does have some sound quality to it. There's some stones that Dennis has in the museum that look like singing stones that I've seen in South Africa. When you're talking about travels, the singing stones were very similar to the ones near all the stone circles in Waterval-Boven, east of Johannesburg. I saw those there, yeah.
And I would certainly implore anybody that comes to the site to visit that museum. Excuse me, the visitor center. My allergies are killing me out here, guys. Bear with me. The visitor center, as soon as you walk in, you have to come through it to access the site. Off to your left, as soon as you walk in the door, you will find many artifacts that have been found on this particular site. I was blown away by some of the things, and you can see the dates, how they are so expansive, the time between when some of these artifacts were, obviously in use by a specific group of people. I mean, we've just had so many numbers of cultures that have been in this site, and we have the evidence that they have been here. It's just absolutely incredible to see, and don't miss that.
What is the oldest date that they have done? Is it the 7,000 to 9,000, or has it been?
Oh, what's even better is we can talk to Dennis Stone about it, who's actually going to join us momentarily.
Yes.
Yes. So since we're live, this was a maybe, so we didn't bring it up with everyone. But the owner of the site is here, and you don't. And if you want, Dennis, you could sit right with Michael and answer questions off air if you want.
Or if you want to say where I'm, it depends if you want to be on
Could be
camera
like
or not.
cozy. Do that.
You can be cozy. Wait, Michael, how do we all get on camera?
As long as Dennis has a seat right where Lynn was, we'll be okay.
These are not just the talkies.
We are live streaming on both our channels. All right, brought to you by, not yet. If we were brought to you by Coke, we're gonna be doing some,
You need to get some money from them.
we are gonna get some light art on that.
Later.
Well, so I was mentioning the 2 campfires that are 7, maybe you had 2 campfires that you found that were 7+ and 9,000+ years old, give or take. But is there something older? Is there anything else other than the stones themselves, which aren't entirely dateable?
Yeah, right.
We
right,
talked a
right.
little bit already about the OSL to catch you up, and just that there's the whole point is to try to like that, you know, it's a difficult process. It's not complete tying all different sites together, that there's some OSL here, but we don't have conclusive dates and we don't know of anything else. So that pretty much the oldest thing is, well, besides you said that, actually, what am I thinking? We're talking about the OSL. We're talking about the well, the whole point of the solstice. You said that the stones are slightly off. Do you think it's because they were moved, or do you think that based on the alignments, are we looking at, is there a tweak where they line up perfect? Is it like X number of 1,000 years ago that it actually lines up?
Right, exactly. Well, during the survey from 1973 to 77, they did about 15 acres. The astronomical. So
All right.
they fed that into a computer at Harvard University, the Harvard Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics, in 1977. In the spring of 78, we did the results back.
Yeah.
And we have the report. We have the name of the person. I think it's Rosenthal was the last name, and they did the analysis of it. And they said that the alignments would work about 1800 BC due to the Earth's tilt changing very slowly. It's a Ligeti cycle of 41,000 years. And so it's either in this cycle or it's on an earlier cycle, but it works at that time period. And and they said you have about a plus or minus 200 year window on that, 2 on either side of that.
Yeah.
And seemed to agree with one of our carbon datings. So we have done 12 carbon datings. One of them was not valid. It wasn't enough material. The other ones were. One also from the Patty area was a composite from the Patty household, burning, probably cooking with wood and throwing the ashes. It actually contaminated older charcoal. And it was mixed in with it. But we can live with that because we had basically 10 good carbon datings. I mean, I think your questions are really valid. You know, what is the real age of the site? A lot of people tend to think the site's older than that time period of even the fire pit that might date back 7,400 years. I mean, I've heard that for decades, basically. I think what we need to do is find some evidence to really support that, but that seems to be a feeling of many people that it's an older site, as well as some of the other sites too, possibly.
And that was a question from someone listening. One of the things about that is one of the things I haven't mentioned, or it just hasn't come up, is this site itself is 110 acres, right?
That's about right. Yeah, just a little bit under that. Yep.
So to give everybody an idea, how much has been excavated?
So since 1937, only about 1% of the hilltop, about 1 acre out of about 100, just under 110 acres have been excavated.
Yeah.
And that shovel test pit study, 50 centimeter diameter holes, that's the stuff that Goodwin did before that.
Yeah.
You're going back to the very beginning of 1937. It continues today.
Right. And one of the things we were telling people is that the availability of the expanse of the variety of sites that are similar in character and construction, that maybe even if they can line up, can't date a stone entirely without OSL, and OSL can only do so much. But if we have 800 sites, and we've mentioned Connecticut a little bit, we've talked about the Upton chamber, but the idea is maybe some of the findings on OSL from some of the other sites that seem to be similar, like we did mention the effigies, the snake, the serpent similarities, but that's something that's spanning between here and Canada, correct?
Right. The serpentine, as far as the walls. I mean,
the
shapes,
walls.
Yeah. I mean, they start in Ontario, Canada. They go south into New England and to the down in Pennsylvania. There was a picture that NERA put out in 1997 of a beautiful stone feature, and it was very odd, and they didn't know what to call it. They republished it, I think, 2 years ago, and now we understand it. It looks like a serpent. But back in 1997, we didn't know.
Right, and now they're everywhere. So there's like, one of the things we were talking about is like, what's the significance of primitive cultures where there's always primitive cultures today where they're alongside, like we have modern culture, and then there's 155 tribes. So one of the interesting things is you have these megalithic societies that are building super smooth, super complex, large constructions. And then nearby there's, or somewhere paralleling, there's a more primitive culture. And if we have these sites or these campfires that date anywhere near the Younger Dryas here, but then you have sites like the Great Pyramids or Angkor Wat, and you have a variety of, again, what appears to be more advanced stonemasons at a minimum. And then we have older sites like Göbekli Tepe and the sites that are similar to that in construction that appear to be maintained over generations of different. The people who built those big T-shaped pillars don't seem to be the people who built they stack stone between the pillars. It doesn't seem like the same group of technologies. But the significance of tracking all these sites simultaneously is that they might all relate to generational or migratory, maybe even they're not the same cultures, but they're people who share the same technology. Because the people who are building this or a snake effigy here are building something similar 1,000 miles away or 800 miles away.
Right, and because the serpent goes back, even at Göbekli Tepe, there's a serpent, copy too. So, I mean, it seems to be something quite ancient,
Yeah.
But these are more rude or crude stone constructions. They're not polished, like you mentioned, 90-degree angles.
No.
But they're nicely stacked. They are put together. They did move stones. Some of them weigh up to 50 tons here, so they weren't afraid of moving and quarrying large slabs. But they're not as refined or polished off, or finished, or dressed. We call the word dressed, in the stones. But these sites number about 800 sites from Quebec all the way in Quebec province, all the way down to Virginia. And some of these features like 13 walls, the walls that are shaped like the letter D as a delta. We got one right over here. North Stonington has several of those. They go all the way out to Colorado with the serpent walls next to them. So, and then even chevron-shaped walls. And it could be some coincidences where you find the same feature, the same style, same shapes across the landscape.
That's it's not just coincidental. There's a point where coincidence doesn't lie into it anymore. There's a number of items around here that they're odd. We talked a little bit about the drill marks that probably date to the 1700s. Right. But then one of the things we pointed out before you got here was just, you had mentioned there would be thousands of those drill marks if it was just a quarry from the 1700s.
Right, I think so. I think it's hundreds or thousands. Sure.
Yeah, maybe hundreds of thousands.
Or maybe, because every flat slab here, not the rounded rocks left by the glaciers, but the flat slabs are called fraction slabs. And Mark Starr in the book Ceremonial Stonework really emphasizes that these stones are peeled off the bedrock, and then they may have been dressed to some degree, using hammer stones, and then they were put into the construction. And right behind you is a beautiful orthostat, and that obviously was part of the bedrock at one time. And just to your left is a fault that goes across the entire hill.
Oh, yeah.
Joint, a fracture.
Actually, Dennis, can you tell? So we're actually, where we're sitting, it's actually a very unique spot. You should talk about that for a minute. It's the major fault.
Right. The whole hill is bisected by a fault, and it runs true east and west, and it's right behind us. And you can see it visually. It's very, very obvious when you look at it. Exactly.
Yeah.
I have gone out to the glacial cliff shelter, and I've looked for it out there, and that's about 1,000 feet west of here. And I actually found where the whole cliff is split in half too. There's a fault called the Clinton-Newbury fault line. It starts in Newburyport, Massachusetts. It runs to the south of here about 7 miles and goes into Clinton, Massachusetts, where it turns and it goes into North Stonington, Connecticut, where something like 8,000 different stone features are located. It's a dormant fault, and this is just one of the, I guess they call it tributary or tentacles of that. So it's not the main, but it's a branch of it, and it runs right through here. And they took advantage of that because they were able to separate some of the big stones. And right behind you, one of the roof slabs weighs about 14 tons. The edge of it's perfectly straight, and we identified it came from right here. And the earth did the cracking, and these people did the removing. I know Peru is built on a fault, and they used that same technique down there when they were removing stones. They took advantage of what nature did.
Yeah, so we're literally on an edge. In fact, shortly before we started going live, that was one of the questions I had for Dennis, because just right past where I'm sitting, it is just a sheer crack that it looks artificial. It doesn't even look real because, well, Mother Nature already did the job. It's a straight up fault line. So I'm really hoping it stays inactive the entire time I'm here.
Then afterwards, we'll see what happens.
Dennis doesn't live on site, and none of us will be here. And at least for 7,000 to 8,000 years, it's been okay.
Yeah.
There's no big crack down the middle.
And the nice thing about it is it's all solid bedrock granite, and structures are sit right on top of the bedrock. Unlike Mexico City, that's sitting on a very soft material. I've been to Mexico City right after my dad and I visited in 1983. They had an earthquake, and the whole thing was like jello. It caused damage to the buildings. You know?
Oh no!
But,
nope. The entire site's on
well,
just loose material.
Yeah, it's on very loose material, and it kind of shakes like jello. So. But this site here is solid rock. It will feel earthquakes, but these structures, they ride the earthquakes pretty well. There may be minor damage to them, but in northeastern Massachusetts, it's still very active for earthquakes. Every year we have earthquakes.
You do? How bad do they get?
They can get up to a couple magnitudes. They just on the news up in someplace north of here, they had one like 2.3. Not terrible ones, but at 1727 off of Cape Ann, that's east of us, maybe 25 miles. I don't know what the magnitude was. They can estimate. They didn't have the equipment to measure them back then. But it was so bad that sand came out of the grounds, rivers reversed their courses, fires in many structures. People that had kerosene and they used candles. Lots and lots of damage. And they said that the church attendance went up greatly after that earthquake. And there are many aftershocks for, I believe, about 10 years. But it was in 1727 was one of the worst. Historically,
1727.
Yeah, I think of that because they supplied the 727 Boeing, so I just added one in front of it. But we have a readout taken from the Harvard University. It goes back to the 1600s. It gives you magnitude and epicenter of earthquakes in this area.
Yeah.
And how they did it before they had the equipment, they must just estimate all this.
Right.
And I have that for hundreds and hundreds of years of the earthquakes that have happened. So this area is subject to earthquakes. That's probably why the Chambered Ruins could have had its roof slab fallen. It's about a 7,000-pound roof slab. So maybe.
And yet, when you think about areas that are prone to earthquakes, you think more or less on the west coast and so forth. But yes, right down here, we do have a fault line, I think, that runs.
We just discussed it.
Yep.
Oh, okay, you
right
did.
Here.
All right.
We're sitting on it.
Yeah. Oh, good. Well, I mean, who's the first to go?
Well, we're on as Dennis already pointed out, we are sitting on the solid slab part. But the precipice of what could be like a marble-sized dip-off is literally the edge of where the ferns are. Are the ferns viewable on screen?
That's where it is.
A little bit.
Yeah. So if you guys can see ferns, they are literally growing in. Actually, they're literally growing in the fault line. So, yeah, that's safe, and it's been safe for 9,000 years. So I think we're good. The wells. Okay, so one of the things we haven't talked about specifically about this site, there's wells, and they're stone lined. And I talked a little bit about the depth, and obviously kids could do it, but has there ever been any excavation on the outside of the wells?
Most of it's taking place inside to clean the wells.
Yeah. Okay.
So pretty much the outside, no, not really. No, and the upper one might be 23 feet deep. It's into solid bedrock. My dad cleaned it out in 1963. In 61, somebody got in there and cleaned a little bit of it. 2 years later, we found the quartz crystals in the bottom.
Interesting.
And they're on display in the museum down there. So the thought was maybe it wasn't a well for water that was a mine shaft taking up quartz crystals. The lower well has never been fully dug. It's only been dug down 12 feet and they hit water. And the swamp is right next to it.
Right.
Which was an area where they obtained clay to make pottery. Below that muck is all white clay. So we have 2 wells on property right
now. And one of the things that I think is super significant you have 1 acre excavated and it's various locations. What are the chances? A lot of again, it's off camera, folks, but looking at the stone here, it's sitting on bedrock. Are some of these walls that are towards the solstice and equinox alignments, are any of those walls of what they found on bedrock, or are they on soil?
That's a good question, because what we did is we ran ground penetration radar over at 2020. When Doria brought up her equipment. She's a geophysicist, and she owns a company called Radar Solutions International. She was really great to bring her equipment up there. Some of it's made right over in Nashua, New Hampshire. Some of it's made in Toronto. And we've been doing some ground penetration radar here since the 90s, but she was really kind of doing some areas we were very interested in. And one of them was quite interesting, but when she ran it over some of the walls, the walls are actually have foundation of cobbles underneath. So you have bedrock. And what we found is they laid a layer of small stones, and on top of the small stones, they put the biggest stones for the stone wall.
No, that's interesting.
Yeah, you know, and we found that in 3 places. We don't know if that's true of all thousands and thousands of feet of wall. We found that in 3 different locations to the west of us.
Yeah.
And that makes it a very, very sound wall against frost, I think also against earthquakes. And as you can see, if these walls are hundreds or even thousands of years old, they're still in pretty good shape, except where trees fall on them. You know, trees cause the most damage, uprooting. The tree, 1938, we had a massive hurricane that caused damage all over New England. That's the famous hurricane. It just devastated the area.
Yep.
In 48, we had another hurricane, and that one, we believe, actually uprooted a chamber in front of us, down near the lower well, on top of that little peak we call Hurricane Pine Ridge because of the hurricane, and there's some pines there. Yep. The pine tree, part of it's still there today. Our first manager's daughter, he was here in 1958, so 10 years prior to that. They used to have a camp down here in Arlington Pond, and kids would all come up here. She played in that chamber, she remembers. The unfortunate thing, we don't have any photographs of that chamber. But when the hurricane hit, not the 38, but the 48, the whole tree came across in our direction. It uprooted the whole structure, and when we put radar on there in around 1993, 94, the first ground penetration radar we were using here, they said about 5 or 6 feet below is a flat surface that could be a floor to the structure. So in 1988, a few years before that radar, we were actually attempting to excavate that. We ended up on the North Stone because the North Stone one was in danger of collapsing or falling over. So that was a 3-year project. And he never got back to that in 34 years. But the radar, you know, back in the early 90s showed there might be a flat floor to that structure. So it's a good candidate for excavation.
Yeah. And
it was a chamber of some kind. And she remembers you could actually walk into this chamber. So it's one of the satellite chambers like the watch house, perhaps.
You mean it's so big enough for
a kid to get in? Yeah, at least a kid. Yeah, you know.
Wow.
And then that hurricane, as you can see, trees cause damage. You know, and down in North Stonington, Connecticut, they did 100 acres, just like we did in 2018. And after we heard how they did, we were going to do it anyway. But when we heard that really you know, clinched it for us that we're going to go and do a forest management project, and they try to remove trees near the walls because the trees are falling on them, uprooting the chambers and so forth. So we did that here as much as we could, you know, with forestry guests. So.
You know, a lot, something we haven't touched on for people listening, and I'm sure they could come here and see the site and it would still go unnoticed, is the amount of management it takes to get this site to be accessible for people, let alone keep it maintained for future research. Can you talk a little bit about what you've done in the last 2 years just with trees?
Right, yeah, about 110 acres of trees. We thinned it out. We removed old, dying, and diseased trees. They wanted to form a canopy up here of trees, and it's healthier for the forest. It's better for the animals. And one of the things is to back the trees away from the stone walls, any chambers that were like the watch house, for instance. And also, we wanted all the astronomical avenues opened up. A couple of them were never open, where the lunar major standstills. 2025, the moon will go through one of its cycles, and I wanted to make sure before that event occurred, and actually witness the moon rising and setting.
Mosquito.
Oh, is there one on me?
No, not anymore. He's really likes you.
Probably a lot of my blood now.
Right? Oh, sorry. We are outside.
It is the New Hampshire state bird, actually, the mosquito.
Oh, you're competing with Minnesota.
Minnesota got them too? Oh, same state bird, yeah.
They are the state bird, yes.
Take them home.
They're so big, you hit them and they just fall over. They don't even squish.
That's a bad mosquito.
Yeah.
Sorry. They're just coming out now. I don't think we had them like a week ago. But
kind of cool. No, they are. I keep watching. We're trying to be cool, but yes, we are in the middle of when it's just sunset enough where it's like we'll eat before we go to sleep.
Yeah, it's that time of day for sure. Yeah.
We are very slow moving deer. Anyway, back to tree maintenance. Just 110 acres of young growth trees. Most of these trees are what? How old?
Well, in 1938, a lot of it was damaged, so we lost a lot of trees during that time. You know, and when I was a kid, I saw a lot of the remains of them. And even today, a couple like that tree that fell on that chamber down there, you can still see bits of it. I should take a piece of that and stick it in the museum to keep it forever. You know.
Yeah.
Back in the Patty era, when they sold this property in 1863, 14 years after Jonathan died, they sold the property to Nathaniel Lake Paul, and he came up here and lumbered it. And obviously that causes some damage to the walls, but, you know, they weren't as careful back then, you know?
Yeah.
And they actually, some of the trees you can see probably hit the walls, and they dragged them with their ox team or their workhorses out of here. So this area was forested sometime around right around time of Civil War. And then the hurricane in 38, and then the hurricane in 48.
There was nothing left then.
You look at Goodwin's early photographs, you can actually see the horizon almost like we can today, because it was a young forest. A lot of it had been, wiped out and everything. So Goodwin had to contend when he came here, the second year he was here, he had a hurricane caused a lot of damage.
And they're not, I mean, some of that, what are some of the, okay, so of what you know from the conservation and management so far, and I was getting to Dennis, by the way, on the, there's a lot of tree cutting that's been going on the last couple of years, but of the trees that are here, what's the oldest one on the property? I never asked.
Right. I don't have a good answer. I do know that down on this side, our licensed forester that we hired in 2018 at the project again next year, there's some really old growth down there.
There is.
Down the hill in where it's kind of inaccessible.
Right.
So those trees, some of the pine trees are this wide, gigantic.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I mean, they might
they're really old.
They could be they could be hundreds of years old, In the chamber and ruins on the north side, back in Goodwin's time, there was remains of the stuff. It was white pine. It was very decayed. They couldn't do tree ring dating. It was too raw for dendrochronology. Okay. So they estimated its age by its state of decay and by its diameter. And they said, well, back around 1936, 37, they said, this tree's probably going back almost 300 years, probably into the 1600s. So 1967, Frank Glenn, president of the Connecticut Archaeological Society, and a new gentleman that had newly joined our research team, James Woodall, I guess he joined us about that time. They actually excavated looking for the roots of that. By 67, the stump's gone, but they figured maybe we could find a piece of root in the wall of the chamber and ruins on the north side of it. And as they dug down, we got all the photographs. There's the root in the wall. They sent that to Geochrome Laboratories in Cambridge, Massachusetts. It was one of the first carbon datings. It wasn't a charcoal, it was of the root, and it dated to 1690 AD. Plus or minus 50 years. So it puts it back before the patty filming. Wow. The thing is, you don't build a structure around the tree. The tree usually penetrates. And since it was a little ways from the stump, it probably took a few years for the little root to go into the chamber itself. So sometime in the 1600s. Patties, the ones they give credit for building this, weren't here until almost 100 something years later.
Well, and the other thing about that is that it's hard work. And I've been doing historical remodeling for a long time. And if you could come to a new country, a new place, and start with the foundation of something, just whatever these are, they're more useful here to build your home than it is to, again, it's not a bad place to start.
These are practical Yankee farmers, or in this case, he was a shoemaker, did some had domesticated animals. When you find a courtyard down here, we think the courtyard's original. You find that down there, it's a nice place to put your household. Get a foundation kind of with a few modifications. Put your house right over it. And he built a wooden house, basically.
And that's curious because you were mentioning the possibility of wood structures being on top of the stones. And we actually have a certain confirmation within the history of the site that, yes, there was at least one place that we can say definitively did have a wooden structure on top of that foundation.
Yeah. I mean, we have the enclosures here, but who's to say that we're not actually sitting in a partially also dismantled because of the coring that was done later. Some of the trees that could have been here, like those pines, how big are those pines? How tall? Like the big ones that weren't forested.
I was talking to the guys. Some of the trees they were hauling out of here went 60, 70, 80, 90 feet tall.
It would, even for primitive society, if you hack a few of those things down, and if you can split this stone, you can certainly split trees. It would not be hard to really look at what we're looking at, even as a possibility. And again, different periods of people. You have a fire along a wall that's 7,000 plus years old. Well, who's to say that these aren't foundations to a wood structure that was more complete? And again, we were talking about this before you showed up. Just what are the chances of any of this having been a primitive mortar? Something very primitive, something that maybe they could quarry to a point, but maybe they didn't have a straight up real concrete plaster. Maybe they just used like a mud.
Sometimes you find that in ancient sites. You find traces of it,
Yeah.
I mean, if this was New England weather, would have pretty much taken care of that.
That's what I thought.
All the heating and cooling, rain and snow.
I mean, if it was a primitive mud, it wouldn't be like
it wouldn't stay. You know,
it wouldn't stay.
No, the rocks.
The rocks would, but it would be. I mean, how old would it be if it really didn't look as bad as it looks? If they got it close enough, if it was kind of a mud finish, it really would look pretty pleasant.
and then they painted it or put some sort of
Right.
coloration or graphics on it.
One of the things that were found, Jen Deo, the archaeologist, a good friend of mine that we used to co-host a lot of shows together, and we chatted a lot. And there is a show about it on Not Aliens about just the Mayans and how frequently they repainted their pyramids. They were constant, like there must have been like whatever the equivalent of Sherwin-Williams was for the Mayans. I mean, how many gallons do you need to repaint one pyramid? And they were doing it from what some of the indications were that I read recently. They were saying they were doing it every 5 years.
Well, I think the Golden Gate Bridge is a continuous painting.
Do they ever stop?
They never stop. I don't think since the 30s they built it, right? So maybe that's a good point. That it may have been just something ongoing, especially with New England weather, hot, cold, rain, snow, that kind of thing. We're not a dry climate here, at least not now, anyway.
No, you wouldn't need a power washer to lose all the mortar from these. These structures would be back to just stone in a few years.
Yeah, if that's what they did.
Yeah, not to mention the rain.
Yeah, I mean the rain. Yeah, we get everything here in the cooling and freezing cycles and everything else. The soil here is very acidic too from the pine trees and everything, and that kind of causes decay, mostly with things that's touching the ground.
Right.
But it does have that. The rain, I guess, tripping on you causes a little bit of problems too because of the acidity, washing and stuff like that.
Right.
We did do some moss testing, and I found those reports from the early 60s, about 60 years ago. They sent it to a laboratory because you can actually, some of the lichens grow very slowly, and they can actually date it.
Yep.
And what the report came back with, it was a wrong type of line. They identified what it was, and they said you sent the wrong type. So that's another possibility if they're still doing that, and I believe they are.
Nice.
When you if you and I were pouring these slabs and you split, you have a fresh surface, and all of a sudden the clock begins, and lichens. It might be another possibility if somebody wants to do that, come up here and get the right lichen this time from, I guess it would have been 1962 or 3. I got the report from. That's the 60s. And so we had good attempts. It didn't always turn out well, because of certain things. But they sent the lichens in. They looked at them, said, "Whoops, wrong type of lichen," and they identified what it was and said, "No, you got to get this other type of lichen." So that's a possibility.
So interesting.
Yeah,
because would that be true about would moisture damage them or no?
I guess it doesn't affect it as far as what they're doing as far as dating processes go.
Because some of these wells might be good resources.
It's possible, yeah. I mean, that's where we need a specialist come and say, "This is what you need for lichens, and this is where you should get it. And this area is good, this area is bad." I don't know.
That would be low hanging fruit. I could work on that.
Yeah, and then there's always how much does it cost? How long does it take to process it? And do you have somebody that can actually collect it properly? Because I could go up there and scrape it and make a mess out of it.
Right. Right.
So
there's some specifics with that. I was EPA lead certified, so I can tell you all about how to manage lead and asbestos.
Yeah, it's probably not as easy at first think it is, So they probably say, "Dennis, this is what you got to do."
Yeah, there is, the steps you have to take to even like prep yourself or take all the material, like just to prep yourself to manage the different chemicals. You do have to worry about contamination in the case of lead. It's like, okay, well, don't get poisoned, but then there's a process to how you even put all your layers on to not contaminate or get contaminated. It goes both ways.
It's hazardous material.
But those techniques, it's like when you're removing or is your DNA, is your skin, is the carbon from one thing to another? How are you affecting a site? How are you affecting the sample you're taking?
It. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Very quickly, Enzo Chiral asks a very interesting question, something that we have gone over before in extensive detail, but for the sake of conversation, maybe we should revisit it. They say, do you think the folks that lived here were migratory? Is this their summer home?
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah, I mean, I don't think we have enough data to really tell. I took climatology in college, and meteorology 1 and 2 and all of that, long-term temperature changes and all of that. And they can look at, growth rings on trees and all of that sort of, and pollen samples, which archaeologists should collect. That's a great question. The site seems to be something that would take a while to build. It wasn't like they were just hunter-gatherers for one thing. I don't know what they ate. I don't know if they could grow any crops. They probably fished, and they used the rivers for transportation. On the west side of us is the Pawtucket Native American Trail. On the east side of us, the Pentucket Native American Trail. Those have been identified. But there are about 800 sites, so...
Did they get along? Just that one generation, how do we, one of the things we were looking at even the site we were in Connecticut was were these fortifications, were some of these cairns really just, because you're on a hill, you're on the right side, coming upbound, you would have
hunters'
a great...
blinds too, sometimes.
That's
and I talked to hunters about that. Some of the ones in Stonehenge photographs, I might use it, but I wouldn't build it for that purpose. It's a hunter's one.
With these cairns so close to each other and numbering in possibly the hundreds,
Yeah.
do you think that that's still a possibility?
I mean, it's a possibility, but some people think maybe like you were talking earlier about celestial
Yeah.
overhead, of stars and stuff like that. That's a wonderful question because cairns, I read a book, Cairns of the World. They can be ancient, they can be modern, they can be Appalachian trail markers, they can be field clearings in some cases, although those are usually fairly not well made. They're just piles of rocks. Some of these cairns that you're seeing, they've been stacked beautifully, at various heights and various diameters. There's chambered cairns, there's cairn fields, there's just cairns. There's cairns with kind of a hollow in the middle.
Yeah.
And there's some of them that are on a main wall and they're on the side of it. We have two of those here. And Mark Stark calls this the host wall with the cairn attached to the side of it without any idea why somebody would do that. But it repeats itself,
That's
So
interesting.
cairns come in various, we have a square cairn here. We have a cairn next to it that's kind of round with a stone standing in the middle, like a little mini monolith that's starting to fall over. So two cairns that were found here also that are no longer here were the two most important ones, I think, with platform. And when we surveyed the site, we fed that into the Harvard Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics computer. They came back and told us about the alignments. We found out that was the center where that platform is. When you look back at Goodwin's diagrams, you look at his book, The Ruins of Great Ireland and New England, there's the two cairns diagram, and they were sitting right at the exact spot where all the alignments came together. Goodwin initially thought they were hollow chambers, kind of beehive chambers attached to the oracle chamber. They were not. They're separate. They're solid. And we have pictures. We found a couple more recently in the 30s. There's a hand winch with a wooden tripod. He's lifting up the rocks from there, rebuilding part of this ramp. On the other side, right behind it, that ramp on the far side.
Yep.
He's using some of the astronomical cairns for that purpose. He had no idea. So 40 years later, we discovered his era. So we have cairns here, and those are the two kind of beehive shaped on the outside. So, but that's a good question. I don't know. I think there's something more to them than maybe, we don't have, if it was a battlefield, I suppose you'd find a lot of arrowheads and, war materials. You don't seem to find that. See,
That's true.
Yeah.
Unless a battle never took place and they built them anyway, but I mean,
But yeah, coming and going or traversing, one of the things that we should point out is for the 1 acre that's been dug up, there is suspicion of potentially a village area that could be significant on the far field.
because they live somewhere, right? Yeah.
They had to live somewhere.
Yeah, I think the site's more ceremonial. That's the feeling we have here. It wasn't really a place of living. It may have been a place of, burial. The chamber right behind me, East West Chamber, looks like gallery graves that you can find in France, Holland. They call them the Giant's Bed. They're also in France, which I visited. And they always run true east and west, 20 to 60 feet in length. They're usually made up of either boulders that are on their end or big slabs of stone called orthostats. In the back of that is the bee hut, and it looks to me like what I saw in Ireland called wedge tombs, although they usually had a little flat wall in the back. So the problem, Mr. Goodwin back 84 years ago when he came in here and started cleaning, they didn't have all the technology we have. They should have taken some of the soil samples out of those chambers and sent them to laboratories and checked them for chemicals, and that might identify if these are human remains, potassium, calcium. They were looking for artifacts you could hold in your hand. They took the dirt out, they sifted it, and that even archaeology is invasive, and we try to do as little of that as we can today.
Right.
Do ground penetration radar, map it, and then if you need to go down, do a dig. Because he destroyed so much, and he wasn't a bad guy. He was a good guy with great intentions.
It was a lot of
methodology.
It was all archaeology that
Pretty true.
They did that so much with the bones. I mean, there was for anyone listening, I'm quoting, there was a woman author who theorized that the bones in Greece in a lot of the temples that they may have worshipped as gods, titans, bones, she was citing that the Greeks were potential early archaeologists, where there was exposed bones from dinosaurs that they told stories that were the Titans' bones. So archaeologists that went into some of these initial temples, they were throwing bones out that they thought, oh, this is an animal bone, or this doesn't belong in here. And they were only looking for jewels. They were looking for gold. They were looking for statues. They were looking for anything that had to do with what they thought was Greek. And they literally threw the baby out with the bathwater. And they didn't. It was pretty typical. So if anybody happens to remember who that author is, I'm just throwing it out there because I'm sick of quoting her and not remembering. But it's the same thing. It's like, okay, can you take another iron rod and pound it into a burial to see if there's a hollow area, or if you've just like taken half the skull off of a burial, but you pulled out a piece of cloth with your hook. I mean, primitive archaeology has been very primitive over the years. But sedimentary nuclear DNA testing, that's new. That's out. There's articles on, Doggerland, which is primarily under salt water, and they're talking about flora and fauna from 9,000 years ago, from granular, literally atomic elements that they're identifying through sedimentary DNA testing. If we knew where those piles were,
right, yeah,
and optimistically, this might be definitely down the line of sedimentary DNA testing. But if there's dirt and they didn't go far from it, I mean, plugs, unlimited budget, time, and material. I mean, you could plug depths and widths around here, and there's a possibility that some of those people juices still remain.
yeah.
Huh? How's that for graphic, everyone? But on the atomic scale, we're not talking like a Coke can that got spilt and is in a cubic foot of dirt. We're talking like, part of ancient Felix is over here in field 1 and was blown, buried under a hurricane tree, and then sunk through some melty soil to like the depths of like intrusive, archaeologically, we talk about intrusive burial. So you have layered earth, and then it ends up, you dig a hole, you put someone in it, and that's an intrusive burial. But what happens when we're talking sedimentary, where an early archaeologist has tossed half of all the sedimentary remains or something? Or what about altars? I mean, if it's not just the crystals being tossed in a wishing well kind of situation, or as a mine, what are they doing with these areas where we think, okay, that's an echo chamber? Well, it's made of stone. Of course it's echoey. What if they were actually just what if they were pouring potions, brews, this one, dumping this out for my dead dog? I don't know. We don't know. All the chemistry of that is atomized. And at what point, can we reanalyze literally atomic elements? And we have stories of Denisovan in caves, and they're finding, well, we found some Denisovan DNA, but we found 127 other animals. I mean, that's coming out in that's science. Those are journal reports. I mean, these are things that are happening, and this site is ripe for it.
There's some areas right inside the 1 acre that haven't been excavated yet, so there's still potential areas, to be looked at.
Oh, actually, for everyone listening, if you didn't catch that, you want to talk about, well, we won't say where exactly, but there is a burial probably.
Yeah, we've been looking at an area that's been interesting around filtration. And they, at that time, identified an area out there we thought was solid bedrock as well. No, and it has earth on top of it. It sounds hollow. It's good. But they said, yeah, there's like cavity there, and that was almost 30 years ago. And the radar we ran over 2 years ago, the woman Gloria brought it up. She's looking at that. She goes, she ran it over. She did a whole thing, a whole back and forth, as the plowman walks, supposed to be getting back and forth. And we took down all the data. And she goes, I've seen this before. She goes, my thought is, she goes, it could be a burial. So until we get into it, look at it, got to be very respectful and careful too at the same time. Yeah. Because now what's remaining of that would be chemicals, and that's where you want to get involved with that.
Yeah.
I would mention it would be dirt. The bones have pretty much begun.
Lynn is currently off screen, but I'm going to say people juices again. There we go.
Turn the camera a little bit. So we get a reaction, right? The camera spins.
Yeah. Well, there was, I know you've already talked about it before, but just for everybody to touch on it, there was a burial found here. One-ish, kind of, maybe, in the past. I think you mentioned that there was possibly one, but none of that village area has been looked at.
Well, that area needs to be, looked at. And that's when they found material that came from just north of Boston. I believe it was Ryla. And they found that about 30 years ago. They're doing a shovel test study across the hilltop. And they found that. And the lady's husband, the woman's husband, she was president of the New Hampshire Archaeological Society. Her husband was a doctor of geology at Tufts, so he was very good with geology. And so she recently in the last couple of years was actually going back because we used to map all of these. They take a transit out, they would survey it, they knew where the points were.
Yep.
The data of this location was missing, where it actual location. We went out there for the last couple of years and we looked for the areas. We did a couple of shovel test pits. We tried to find that same location. It was kind of on a plateau.
Yep.
But it was tilted enough so drainage, it would be a nice place to build a place. You don't want a place where the water's going to run through your village,
Right.
and or too swampy. And she goes, this is the kind of area that I found other habitat sites. And then she did her dig. She found the rhyolite and said, this is tool making material. This came from, and she identified a source. And it was a workshop. And she did a workshop. You probably have a habitat site near the workshop for making stone tools.
Making it easy.
So we need to get back into that area. She's retired. She's in her 80s now, and she's trying to find a replacement for her. So we're kind of on a hiatus at the moment. Most of the archaeologists are interested colonial in the Northeast or little points, pottery. You talk about these things being artifacts, big structures.
Yeah.
It's out of their realm. They haven't trained about that. They don't deal with that stuff. It's all little micros. So we need to get somebody that can get out there. Well, that particular thing, maybe we could get a regular mainstream archaeology and work on that. They'd be qualified.
Just don't even tell them about this side. Just say,
keep this out of the
pretty
picture.
sure this is like indigenous.
Yeah. They don't want to. They want to deal with big stone.
Somebody said there was mastodons in this here parts. Anybody want to look for the 20th mastodon kill site? North America's got 19. One of them's at Galt, but the next one could be at America's Stonehenge. I mean, across the hill at the other random site that's near here.
Wouldn't that be something, huh?
Yeah. Oh, man.
I'll be flocking up here to help dig, right?
Can you imagine? If
You can't exactly
a few people would eat their comeuppance. I mean, seriously, that would be pretty spectacular.
Okay.
I mean, we're getting far enough north. It could be something more woolly, but that is quite interesting. All right. So I know we touched on tree management, but to help people, oh wait, are there any questions or anything that I should be answering?
Nope.
Oh, good.
I've got everyone coming in.
Okay, great. So one of the things we touched on was tree management. So to give people an idea when they come here to visit, oh, by the way, we mentioned solstices, equinoxes. Dennis is kind enough. So if you've never been here during one of these events and you want to see the site actually function, you are open.
Yeah, we open for those events like the summer solstice, spring and fall. We used to open up the cross-border days, May Day, May 1st, August 1st. And not as many people turn out, but they don't really realize that was actually the beginning of each season. They're very, very important. Not only in Europe, like May Day, Samhain, or Samhain is I call it Samhain, but Samhain, is November 1st, All Saints Day, and they were at the beginning of each season. And when we went to Mesa Verde back in 1990, when I got to Mesa Verde, I found out Mesa Verde has not only the quarter days, we just mentioned spring, fall, winter, and summer.
Really?
They had the cross-quarter days. And then I went to Cahokia, and they had the wooden circle that they recreated there. I was there about 1992, and it had the seasons. And if I'm not mistaken, don't quote me on this, I believe it had the cross-border days. But the Mesa Verde is the one that really took me by surprise 30 years ago, because it's over here too, and we have it at this.
Yeah.
So 8 parts of.
So the times that people may want to come, they could be here in the morning at 4.
Dark 100. Yeah, it's like really early in the summer.
Yep.
Winter's not as bad. It's just cold. It's a short day. I mean, the sun's setting like 4:20 or whatever, and the sun's up in the morning still late 7. But spring and fall is not too bad. It's around 6.
But if you guys want to come for those events,
the next one will be the fall equinox.
There we go.
3 months from now. So.
Well, it ain't gonna be around September 24th, but we will be here September 24th.
Close enough.
Yeah, right.
We have 57 alignments that go Sun, Star, Sweep, 24 star alignments. That was part of that Harvard. And so Dr. Winkler from Penn State back over 20 years ago came up. He got involved with us in 97. He started looking for the star alignments. And he found like Aldebaran and Sirius and Rigel and a couple of
Really?
That we're actually aligned with some of our markers out there. So they need further research, confirmation, study, I think. But one of the last ones we found was that illumination inside the watch house. The stone quartzite piece is illuminated, but it's also framed by the shape of the doorway. And then 30 minutes later, it looks like a hand pointing back at it. That's the last.
That was pretty interesting.
Pretty cool. Yeah. I mean, I don't think that's a coincidence that they shaped the doorway to make it fit that stone.
Yeah.
And then it looks like a hand. But that's probably the last alignment that we discovered, and that was 2 years ago. So even from 1965 up to 2 years ago, we've been finding very slowly.
Right, and and again, clearing the site. You spent 2 years and you've cleared what, 15 plus acres?
Well, yeah, they did about 110 acres. They did the whole hilltop, just thinning, and then the alignments they really opened up, really wide. And the serpentine walls, which you mentioned earlier, about 14 of them, we really cleared the trees away from them.
Yeah,
you can see them pretty well now. We've been using LiDAR on them and everything.
Yeah,
yeah, which helps.
Well, and there's also some Celtic. There seems to be some. Well, there seems to be some numerical references that could be European.
As far as the
Celtic, like the numerics that are inside that were on that standing stone.
Oh, the 39 law.
Yeah,
according to Barry Fell. Yeah, you'd have to read his book America BC to get the full gist of it. And he covers sites in Vermont, all over the place. This site was chapter 7, one of the main focus of his research. And that stone was found 1975, the first year he visited us.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
It's and again, Irish monks prior to Vikings.
Yeah.
So there's a chance that there is there's no device that's going to help come up with some of the. I mean, if it's not packed in onto a stone, it's if it was drawn, you're just not going to see it.
Yeah, it would have disappeared by now.
Yeah, there isn't anything. I know that there was a chunk missing off of where the numerics might be on that one stone, but there are standing stones that have not been picked up on the property that are still laying down.
Yeah, there could still be markings. They have that scanning. What do they call it? It's called. We've been doing the LiDAR.
Yep.
Yeah, but the next one is like a scanning LiDAR. According to Tom, the gentleman that did our LiDAR, he spent about $50,000 just on the unit, and then he spent many more thousands on a new computer and software. Because the next step up is about $150,000 piece of equipment, or a little bit more, and he can see down to a centimeter. This can see smaller, and they're picking out in Stonehenge markings that were never seen with the eye before, or at least with our eyes today. The ancients saw it because they did it.
Yeah.
But without that equipment, it's hard to see any of that. And that
Right.
scanning, what do they call it? Scanning? It's like a scanning. It's a LiDAR, but they set these on tripods, and it does its thing. Then they have to move it. They did Peru, Machu Picchu. They said the engineering in that place is magnificent for earthquakes, for drainage, and they even channeled water through it.
Yep.
All of that was intentional, but that scanning equipment they use, and it takes a lot of time because you have to keep moving it around. Where he can just walk around very quickly. He goes, if you want me to do anything more accurate, we got to get that scanning LiDAR, whatever it is, and it's $150,000 unit. Because if you have the money to,
Right.
So that would be cool. Maybe that will pick up
Yeah.
things that we're looking at today that we don't.
Yeah.
Maybe there's nothing there. Maybe there are some more markings. Etchings.
Yeah.
You can see less than a centimeter.
It's hard to not, like you mentioned, it's like somebody who's like, if you want to see Viking, you see Viking. If you want to see Celt, you're going to see Celt.
See Phoenician, you see Phoenician.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You want to see images in stone, you'll see them too.
That's true.
That's true, man.
If you more readily want to find spiders or frogs, you'll do it.
Pareidolia, I think they call it.
Yeah.
Seeing things, right? Pareidolia.
Pareidolia,
And you have to be careful of that because we all do that.
Absolutely.
You always look at stuff, even in trees, I'll see a face or something.
That's the way the mind works. What's
So
that?
it could be something I hate too,
Yeah,
or whatever, But yeah, I mean, when you're looking at markings, and Barry Fell got accused of that. He'd look at ancient markings, and he would see certain, markings on the stone, and he might actually, not put one of the markings in an interpretation and leave it out, or he might say, well, there must have been that part of it still there, and it's worn away, and they do wear away, Now you get a little criticism for that kind of thing with his interpretations and stuff. He passed away in 1994, and he worked on this particular project over 20 years before he died. Finding markings from Maine all the way to Brazil. I at least identify them. Other people found them, and then all the way out to the West Coast. Phoenician, Libyan, Celtic, other types of Semitic script and stuff like that.
With that being said, Jobo Hobo asks, any Phoenician evidence? Some people think they came to the Great Lakes to mine tin. Could they have gone further?
Yeah, I mean that's one of the things they've been talking about for years. Lake Superior, I think, Isle Royale, I think, it's a 40-mile island, and it's really pure copper, flow copper.
Yeah.
I think Scott Walters is kind of in that area, and he knows about it. You know about it too. I mean, the Phoenician evidence, I mean, there are markings here that seem to be Phoenician script. Banana Island up in Maine, right next to Mohegan Island. I was there 2 years ago, and I tried to go over and see the inscriptions. It was during COVID. There was no boat operation between the islands, and the only way you could get there is to swim, and I wasn't about to do that. Same week, a lady just down the street from there got killed by a shark, and we were kind of almost joking about it before she died, not about her. Because I was telling my friends, maybe I'll have to swim over there. And even the hotel says, if you want to go, you swim. My wife goes, there's currents, there's boats. And then my buddy goes from West Virginia, Mark Eddy. He goes, you might get bit by a shark. I said, bro, and sure enough, that lady, it was really a tragedy. And I'm glad I didn't swim across there because there are sharks in the area. I didn't realize that. She was like about 3 miles down the way and she died. It was one of the ones that made national news. But I never got over there to see the inscriptions, and I've been wanting to go there since 1970.
How far away is it?
It's about that's probably about 2-3 hour drive up there. It's not as far as Bar Harbor. It's on this side of Bar Harbor. It's on this side of Portland.
So looking to fill up my week after the Stonehenge lecture on the
Right
24th.
Oh, it's nice up there. Oh, it's so nice. And hopefully somebody gives you transportation. They said it had stopped. Last time somebody was bringing people was 2019, and the person doing that wasn't going to do that in 2020. So I had no way to get over there. But all the way down to the Parahiva stone in Brazil, and that was found by slaves in 1872. 150 years ago, they were there, and these slaves saw this. And it was really cool. They saw it, and he tried to bring it to people's attention. Nobody really paid attention. According to Cyrus Gordon and a epigrapher, a guy that reads script, and Barry Bell, it was Phoenician markings, according to what I remember reading, and it was a little while ago I read that. So from here to there, all the way up to the West Coast, Milk River in Alberta, Canada, I believe is Celtic Ogham. So Celtic Ogham, Phoenician, and Libyan, Barry Bell came out of the Iberian Peninsula. It was a melting pot. The Celts came in there, the Phoenicians came in, and the Libyans came into Libya, and they settled in there. And they're probably multilingual, and they stepped off that peninsula to go to the west, like Columbus did much, much later. Is a thought, and it's a theory. It has to be proven. It's interesting.
What's interesting is from a trade route standpoint, I know that a lot of people don't know this, but the fastest way from America to Africa is actually from Maine, because we're on a globe, and Maine will get you to Africa faster than leaving from Florida. A lot of people don't know that. They just assume that the lower you go, the closer you are. But Maine is actually closer to Africa. But if you were a Celt, and Scott Walters talked about it too, the idea that the Egyptians actually were trading directly to Ireland, Scotland, that area. And if you were going to a giant open copper mine, because literally it's laying on the ground, and you were a copper culture, it would seem to make sense that maybe all these trade routes are opening up and actually connected. But
during the Bronze Age, copper, and then you needed tin, right?
Yeah. Well, and
to make bronze.
Yeah, it's the exception to become a historical record or a fossil. It's not like it's nobody left it around because they're like, somebody's going to see this boat one day and know that the Phoenicians were here. It wasn't like it was well, there are people who are like, Brachus is a jerk. I mean, I guess that they just found
graffiti.
Yeah, they did just find they just found that on the Hadrian's Wall. Yeah. Like somebody actually they put a big phallus and they literally said somebody sucks. Yep.
Wow.
This is straight for our news portion. But yeah, they did just find a period. Somebody was giving somebody, it's like, oh, he guards this section of the wall. Take that.
Okay, huh? Wow. Just like you do today.
Yep. People have really changed over the years.
Well, they say if you want the best Viking graffiti, go to Mace Hall in Scotland.
Really?
Yeah, it's not too far from Skara Brae. It's just down the street. It's the burial too. And I've seen photographs. I've been to Scotland, but not there. And some of the best. And the structure was sitting there probably 2,000 or 3,000 years before the Vikings came along. And then the Vikings went in and put graffiti all over it, like you see in a city today, and go, look at that mess, But it's there today. It's kind of cool. It's historical in itself,
Well, Graham Hancock brags that his father had climbed the Great Pyramid.
Oh.
And he climbed it many years ago. And at the top, he says he found his father's graffiti.
Seriously, I haven't heard that one.
Yeah. That's straight from Graham Hancock.
His dad's name was...
his dad actually wrote his name on the top of the pyramid, and he found it.
That's incredible.
Yeah. I don't know. I know. Is that nuts? I mean, there's a lot of things
Yeah,
that, you know,
check that out.
we look at the
Mm.
monument as untouched or,
Right, for thousands of years.
and then you look up and everybody who's ever been there, besides stealing from the thing, has apparently etched their name in the top.
Which someday is kind of cool, but when it happens, even here we have people scratching the rocks here. As soon as you see it, it's kind of a form of vandalism, you know. And
Yeah.
we kind of frown on that, and the national parks are having some of the ancient petroglyphs people either stealing them and selling them on the black market, or they're scratching over them, you know. And it's like you get horrified when you see
Yeah.
that.
It's just
Thousands of years from now, they'll say, "Oh, look at that cool old graffiti on that
Right,
older
yeah.
strip." But today it's not so cool, you know. It's like it is kind of vandalism.
No, it is. It's horrible.
Yeah.
There is some Matthew. There's another channel that has a buddy that did just film the top of the Great Pyramid, and I've been able to look at some of the photos of it. There's a very interesting stone up there in the center that is very different than the rest, but you can see the graffiti, and it's just, gosh, is it extensive. But good thing. And on the other hand, one of the things about America's Stonehenge, we're sitting on stone and we're on a fault line. And one of the things I asked you last time was, had anyone ever gotten it down to this layer on the other side, the valley side, where, you know, did they ever etch a person or something into the stone? And it seems like some of this technology you're talking about would be able to see if everything, you know, had a figure on it.
I mean, can you imagine what we have today? Some of it's very expensive. You have to have a specialist to use it. But you can imagine in a few years from now to be able to look down below through the earth as it can with ground penetration radar, but also see maybe that, hey, there's an inscription down there, that kind of thing. I don't know when that will happen, but it almost seems like a technology. Our LiDAR imaging covered 15 acres, as you mentioned. It took 600 hours to process. The lady with her ground penetration radar did several thousand square feet. She got software now. She's going to blend her radar images with Tom Elmore's LiDAR. It will have 3D above, below image. So it's the first time that's being done. Blended
cool.
LiDAR with radar.
Yeah,
put it together, you know. So that'd be kind of cool. And I can't wait to see the results of that.
I know, and this is the first time that anyone's done it.
From what we understand, I mean, somebody in some other part of the world may have, but that's our best knowledge.
What are you looking at, Lynn? Is there something up?
Just you guys.
Okay, great.
No, I'm just checking out the picture.
All right, just checking.
No, if there's a question, I'll let you know.
All right.
Talking about phallic graffiti.
Oh, yeah, I suppose. I brought that up. This is my bad.
That's what you got out of this whole thing?
Thousands of years. We're still doing
hours
it.
Of talking. And
lesser known Led Zeppelin album.
Yeah. You got at least you get something out of it.
So
true, right?
You know what? Straight to Monty Python, biggest dickus. All right, great. I'm glad I could bring it lowbrow. So much for all of this. We have a vast well of information here, folks. You guys can be asking really deep, interesting. There's 6 degrees of separation here from you guys knowing all sorts of crazy stuff, and you're looking at who wrote the biggest insult on Hadrian's Wall.
You brought it up, man.
Yeah, my bad. My bad.
Here goes the show, you know?
Right.
Well, we brought that down, didn't we?
That's it, folks. Take care.
We're kind of there,
Thank
I guess.
you so much. Farewell.
Wow. We were just talking about people getting eaten by sharks. You guys didn't pick up on that?
Wasn't it exciting enough?
Yeah, and somebody literally 3 hours from here got eaten by a shark.
That's
Why was she eaten by a shark, by the way?
Imagine
What was she
sharks
doing?
swimming out there, you know?
There's
like
a lot
I
of great whites out here.
It's a horrible.
It's a horrible death.
Yeah.
I don't want to get eaten.
I don't think anybody does.
Yeah, imagine that.
We already discussed how long a head might. Anyway, yeah.
Oh, my gosh.
I mean, all right, we're going over it, but the markings out on that island are pretty detailed.
Yeah, I mean, they're pretty good. I haven't got up close to see them, but the photographs, and I even brought my binoculars, but I couldn't see them from where we were. But the markings go right across the continent. I mean, there are so many of them, and because people say they're hoaxes, fake frauds, misinterpretations.
Right.
You know, some of the mainstream and some of the skeptics, some of the bloggers. But
Experts.
some of these were found in the 1600s. Cotton Mather found some, the Diamond Rock down in Massachusetts. That's 300 and something years ago. And so not all of these things were found recently. Some of these were found hundreds of years ago, and people were questioning them like Cotton Mather. What is this thing? Who did this? Oh, the Gunji Womp site, you guys, right here, Gunji Womp. And John Pynchon wrote to Governor Winthrop in 1654, 368 years ago, and said, "What the heck is this place?" Basically. Now there is some talk that it might have been North Stonington, which is right nearby with all the things, all the structures, or Gunjiwamp in Groton, Connecticut, right by the Navy base. And we think that's the place they're referring to. And again, 368 years ago, and if these were all built by farmers, you know, why were they questioning what these things were at that time? That's pretty
right. They would already know.
They would already know. They would have probably seen the builders if they, you know. So, but the OSL datings coming back on this site, the sites all the way to Virginia right now are before the colonial period, and some of the dates go well back before Columbus. So not some farmer to.
Was there any indigenous indications as to what they are? Has there been any local tribe that has been willing to share their stories that you know that say, yeah, there's this legend, there's this story? Do any verbal folklore?
Well, if you watch the Holtz Files on that, one of the guests was Daryl Jameson. Scott Walt, this is the next show. He's a branch of the Wampanoag, and I became a Facebook friend with him. So Daryl is Native American. He's got 25% Orkney Island blood in him. He believes he's part of the Sir Henry St. Clair expedition with Sir James Gunn. James and Jameson, and his last name is Jameson. And he goes, "I have Orkney Island blood." He came up here one time and he almost passed out. So when he did the show, he did it only halfway up here. They set up a whole thing at night, halfway up. He would not come up here. He goes, my European side, this site's okay. My Native American side, we didn't build this. We're not part of this. And that would be on that show called The Ancient Evil, second season of the Holtz Files. But Paula Underwood, we met her back in the 90s, and she was an IBM consultant, lived in California, and she was Iroquois. Her father taught her two ways, I believe it was two ways of repeating 10,000 years of oral tradition, Native American, history. And she had to repeat it both ways to get it kind of get the story straight. And the book she wrote was called The Walking People. And she lived out there. She didn't know about our sites all over the Northeast. And she became aware of these sites in the early 90s. But she had a mystery in her mind. Why would this story talk about these hills with these structures on them, these stone people, and different odd people that built these things? They were not her people. When she first heard about us in the early 90s, she was like, wow, that makes sense. Not only I didn't know about the stone structures, but I didn't know they were in New England. And the theory is maybe these were not built by Native Americans. And the whole thing, she came out here and did a circle, what we call prayer circle in our theater. She came out twice. So we get to meet her. She passed away, but she's another Native American that said this was not her people. She was more from the New York area, the Iroquois kind of up in Canada. Yeah. But these sites are out in that area too, in New York. I mean, the Hudson Valley has over 500 of these sites. Westchester, Dutchess County. So, and we've had a couple of Native Americans that have been here and talked about the site too. I just had another gentleman. He did a smoke circle with Gloria. The lady with the LiDAR is Native too. So I don't know what her views are particularly on the site.
Well, Dennis, it gets even more famous. I mean, who's more famous than Pocahontas?
Well, John Smith.
Oh no, but you're looking at the would that would be
my 11th great grandmother.
You look like her. Is that right? Is that right?
Yeah.
Isn't that so cool?
Yeah.
Did you do a DNA thing or just his family history?
Yeah, genealogy.
That really?
Mm.
Which one well, I don't, you're not advertising, but I should, but I want to do that with my family because my son was born with a blue spot, Kelsey was.
Really?
A Mongolian spot on his back. And I asked even Daryl Jeremy, because not only Native Americans get that, but if you get that, you might be Native American. Because our family, as they came down from Canada, Native American.
Interesting.
And Kelsey was born with that right after birth. And then it's like a big birthmark in his back, and then it just faded away.
Interesting.
If we don't have Native American, that's always been our family history, then that would be like, wow, what was that?
Yeah, interesting.
But we are officially sitting here doing this entire thing with Pocahontas descendants. It's the same thing.
It'd be interesting to see what their history too, if there's anything, because the stonework goes into Virginia.
Yeah.
So, do they have any oral tradition? So many of them were wiped out during smallpox and hepatitis B and stuff like that. A lot of the traditions were kind of severed, I guess.
Yeah.
Bad storytelling.
Yeah. yeah. I mean, but you wonder, I met a woman from the Cape Cod area, and she goes, my oral tradition talks about the Vikings, and she's been here twice. And I wish I got her name, the Facebook friend. Yes. This goes back probably 10 years ago, and she was here for a couple times, because I know this is about the Vikings in my coming. Because they found a Viking accent in Cape Cod, and they found mooring holes that might be Viking. They found in the Bass River I think Harvard University was working on that dig, if I'm not mistaken, during World War II,
Mhm.
where a boat repair place, but it wouldn't fit any historic boats that are colonial or post-colonial. It would actually be nice for a Viking size ship. I don't know if that stood the test of time, because some of these things, like they say something and no,
Right.
they correct.
Yeah.
But the Viking thing, and then because the Maine coon cat up in Maine, that wonderful cat my dad had too, the DNA study shows it's half Norwegian horse cat by DNA, and the Vikings may have had the cat on the boat to keep away mice and rats. It mated with a cat from Maine, now extinct. So that's a piece of one of those pieces of evidence that may support the Vikings make it right into the maybe,
Yeah.
That means hypothetically, because we've taken a lot of Dennis's time, but you're not
I'm
stopping.
watching my clock right here.
You know what we should do is we should really get between Dennis and you, we should get all the indigenous people on camera. I'm gonna slide out. Lynn should sit here for the final segment. I'm gonna slide out.
Final
Watch this
segment.
crab walk. Crab walk. I'm off camera, right?
Nice job.
There you go. That was slick, right?
Elvis has left the building.
I'm at least behind the camera with. Oh, it's so cool back here, Michael.
It's a nice little room, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah.
I'll take a picture of us.
Could be a little warmer, but they
Behind
do.
the scenes.
Surprised they would turn the camera around.
I know, right? Just give Jared a second.
Well, now I can read everyone. Oh, great. I'm great. So now your turn.
Wow. You like how he does that? He gives me such a good transition.
Oh,
Go.
Yeah, I know. Huh?
I don't.
I know. I always get the deer in the headlight look. When somebody says that to me, I'm like, where do I go?
Well, of the markings that have been, or of the cultures or the trails that have been identified by the two tribes that you just on either side of the valley, you said there was a couple tribes identified. What's the nearest? What's the oldest known tribe that's been? This was our valley, or this was our.
Well, that's a good question. I mean, because it's kind of, so many of them passed away, and a lot of that
Right.
knowledge was lost. But the Pennacook were up in Concord, and under them was Kentucky. Recently in Keene, New Hampshire, the Archaeological Society of New Hampshire found 13,000-year-old human evidence. It goes back 1,000 years before Jefferson, New Hampshire. So 13,000 years, we're getting back. And they would have never thought that.
And where did they?
Right.
Keene, New Hampshire.
Oh.
Yeah, right around the Keene area, the
Ah.
southwest part of the state, about 100 miles west of here, well, maybe 90 miles, depending on how the road flies over there.
Right. Yeah.
So that's pretty early, right after
Right.
the Younger Dryas was kind of still finishing up around that
It
time. I
it
think.
is.
Yeah, so it's getting further back. When I was a kid, a few thousand years.
Yeah.
In fact, people say if this site is 4,000 years old, who was here even 4,000 years ago? A lot of average people coming to me don't know, that people were here that long ago in New Hampshire, for instance.
That's amazing.
Much. It's because of the school systems with the teaching, perhaps not teaching, or just in general, people just don't think about it.
Right.
And I would be like that if I didn't work here, and he wasn't up here,
No, but the Galt.
If you
the-
weren't
hey, they were at the Galt site has made it very clear that Clovis first never happened. And they have the largest Clovis site in North America. And the reality is that there is so much human activity below the Clovis, which is around 12, around Younger Dryas 13,000 years ago. But you have a massive period, a decent chunk of years of inactivity. And then they have their stone floor that dates back 20,000 years now. And again, way at Laco, Mexico, you have a site that Virginia Steen McIntyre and her team in the 60s, it's now established that it's well over 300,000 years old. So the reality is the primitive or human occupation on this continent and the story of it, let's just stick with the Galt site. The Galt site is known to be one of 19 mastodon kill sites. It has Clovis artifacts. You can literally stand and between your feet see an arrowhead or something as you tour the site, but you have human manufacturing facilities doing stone tooling, arrowheads, and they're saying that site connects to people traveling up into the Ohios. So what does that mean for here? There's no way then that there's not human occupation for 20,000. So pre-Younger Dryas. But then where do we look for that? Well, you have to choose to go to a layer of earth that's going to be pre-Younger Dryas. And then you have, again, like you said, standard archaeologists saying, well, there's nothing below that. Well, have you looked? Well, we don't need to look. Well, what?
It sounds like a Monty Python. It sounds like we're back to talking graffiti. It's so circular. It's like, well, if you don't look, it's not there.
So we had the Clovis barrier and just we
And that's it. Oh, it's, yeah, there's nothing under that.
barriers too, yeah.
Yeah, well, where's the bedrock? You know, where's the bedrock
It's not
land
very
you?
scientific. They choose something, or they make up a rule and it's fixed. And you're not supposed to go outside that.
And the facts don't fit the narrative, then don't find the facts, or you only find what you're looking for.
Right. Exactly. A lot of them are doing- And they find things they're not looking for, they push to the side.
Yeah.
They
That's-
do it.
Hey, are you afraid of that happening here?
Oh, no, not at all. Never.
Low hanging fruit, Lynn, go with it.
No. I will say that some archaeologists even said that your archaeologists are wasting time. They should look at different sites.
Oh,
Someday, those archaeologists, and some of these sites are being damaged by bulldozers, by
Yep.
vandalism, by just being ignored.
Yep.
And someday, those people that have said those things, probably their name should be held there too.
Yep.
For all the credit that's due to them for
Yep.
these sites being ruined. It's not very scientific.
No.
Absolutely not.
It's sad.
So do
And
we
then-
have
go ahead.
any oral? No, that's okay. Do we
Okay.
have any oral traditions from any of the native peoples in this area that have anything to do with this site or anything close
Well,
by?
Daryl Jameson and I mentioned Paula Underwood from ways away, but we've heard over the years that Native Americans, stated that they didn't build the site.
Right.
That they built wood or hide, or, box structures, and some of them, what we heard, and it should be probably in my dad's reports, that this place was taboo, not a place that they would come to. It's one of
Weird.
those things that we need. It would be nice to talk to the people, hundreds of years ago that said these things. But that's kind of in general, that it's not a place. In the Northeast, Native Americans use stone tools, utensils, and they had weapons and stuff. But to build stone walls, structures,
Right.
barns, chambers.
Right.
The thing that I do think, though, Native Americans were into the snake, but many other cultures were. When I saw the snake walls, I started feeling a little Native American, However, but it's a worldwide thing with the serpent.
Right.
But maybe that influence. I mean, Mark Eddy, we talk a lot about the influence coming out of
Yep.
Mexico and the South into the Ohio, into New England.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a lot of that. Mark's been on that for years. He's been on my butt about that for years. And it's like the great plume serpent came out of Mexico and came into the Ohio Valley. We have one serpent, well, it seems to have a horn in the back, but I don't know if I showed you that. And when I started doing a little research, because one of the guys from Nera asked me, do you have a 2-horned serpent? I said, no. And then I looked at this one out here, and I was looking at the Mi'kmaq. They're more up in Nova Scotia, Prince Edward Island, and I think they do come into Maine also, but their influence came down here, and they had the 1-horned serpent. I mean, one of my serpents looks like it has a head with a big horn on it, like that. Whether it is or not, it's just something to put out to people. They can do some research. They can believe it or not believe it.
That would be a great T-shirt for the site.
Like we should do that.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
Good point. We should do a serpent. We really should.
Yeah.
'Cause we got 14 of them. We think.
Right.
Yeah, but a serpent with a horn on it. Yeah, that
I
would
like
be
that.
that'd be a great T-shirt.
Mike went up to you.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Maybe we should do that. We should do that. Maybe
Yeah.
we should. Yeah.
I mean, because the point is the questioning.
Right.
The point is to ask the questions.
You see that on somebody's shirt, they're going to bring up a conversation. I think for
Absolutely.
sure, right? Like, what the heck is that?
Dennis, we're going to live to see Mark Eddy's dream of sedimentary nuclear DNA testing proving out Mayan blue
Yeah.
in the trade route from Georgia to the Ohio.
Yeah.
So, like,
Georgia. Yeah.
somebody traded out for Mayan blue, and that these were plastered, and there was a roof, and there was actually like 80-foot pine trees chopped into the rest of the foundation.
Wouldn't it be interesting to see what it looked like?
Yeah.
So superficial wooden structures, perhaps.
Yeah.
I can only
Nothing
imagine even
complicated.
just putting up decorations made out of wood,
Yeah.
and then maybe structures too.
Yeah, wouldn't have
Long
been
gone.
gone, but
Yeah. Totally.
or
Yeah.
quarried,
Yeah.
or again, at some point, this little earthquake zone could have shook a little bit harder. But for everyone joining, that literally the fault line is behind Lynn to her left, where the green ferns are. The ferns are growing in the fault line.
Literally sitting on the phone, pretty much.
Going very well.
That makes me feel like it's settled. It's just they know something, like they're safe here. They don't need to worry about it opening back up and swallowing them.
Oh, you know what somebody mentioned I don't know if you guys asked this or not when I was going to get Dave. They asked if there were any ley lines around here.
That's a great question. I have a friend from England, Maria Wheatley, and she's big on that. Dad was here 40 years ago. He's an archaeologist, and I've done some podcasts with her. She's actually, I sent her some materials from here, and she's done some dowsing. And that dowsing's a little ahead of the U.S. dowsing, I guess, and she's given me a few ideas. She's been in she goes to Sedona quite, and she was doing the Santa Cruz West Coast Dowsers convention at the university 2 years ago. Got that thing, but yeah, so they have Dowser site. The Dowser Society of America, I believe, is out of Vermont, and Sig Longren was the president of that back in the 70s. He's moved to England, and he knows Maria too over there. He's living there now, but he used to bring all his people down here and do dowsing. I have a 1978 booklet, and it has a site. Edward Krupp from the Griffith Observatory did a little thing in there. Francis Hitching, John Michel. I think he just passed away. He's famous from England. It was done in England. The booklet, we have it here, and it has the whole site. It has all the different lines. According to them at the time, the structures pretty much cover, and some of the walls cover the water lines. The ley lines are on the alignments. One of the main ones is summer solstice sunrise. 10 years ago during college, my son took that Google Earth right across New England, right over to England, and found it aligns with Stonehenge. Maria says 2 points are a topical ley line. You had to have 5 points to make it an official ley line. I didn't know that. I'm like, okay, I had never heard that. I thought this was a ley line.
Yeah.
But she goes 5 points, 5 additional points. And I said, wow, we do have the platform. We have the point you stood at. You have the stone. You have the notch on the far distant horizon. And because then you have the big trilithon. It's one of the 5 trilithons of Stonehenge. It goes right to the center of it. But I think she means more like 5 major sites, if you will.
Yeah.
Like in England, it might be like Old Sarum, Salisbury Cathedral. I think Avebury's part of that. Stonehenge, I think, is Alfred Watkins 100 years ago wrote this. What do you call it there? I have the book in the building too. It's called The Old Straight Track, I think. Alfred Watkins. It's more about practical matters of going across country following these points. But then people got into the earth energy thing.
Yeah.
And these are on certain vortices for certain energy. That alignment does go to Stonehenge. The one that goes to the west goes to the Canary Island pyramids, which L.A. Missoulian wants to go with me sometime over there and see them. They're really cool pyramids. I didn't know they existed. Opposite that is a sunset. It's the equinox sunset. It goes to Pueblo Bonito and Chaco Canyon, which isn't that cool?
Yeah.
It's such a beautiful place out there. The August 1st is the last one I found, and that one goes to the Great Pyramid on the Giza Plateau. August 1st is Lammas. It's one of the cross-border days. The true south alignment goes to Machu Picchu, and the winter solstice sunset goes to the moon pyramid at Teotihuacan, which my dad and I went to back almost 40 years ago. Not the sun pyramid, but the moon pyramid. I mean, people can check these, double check these, triple check these. We haven't had anybody say they don't work. We try to do it as carefully as possible. So some people think those are ley lines. So we put that up.
Yeah.
Marie said you had to have 5 points to make a true ley line, but those are topical ley lines, I guess.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's something I gotta do. She's gonna come over here and she's gonna teach me more about that. I'll give you an update.
Fantastic.
Just those people and those subjects and $150,000 new LiDAR, we have a lot to look at.
Right.
Yeah. And who knows what technology is right around the corner?
No, or practical. Everyone's playing with home 3D printers. Won't be too far along and you can literally get a gene CRISPR, which is terrifying, and mess with genes. You'll have your own home sedimentary nuclear DNA tester, and you can just start putting vials of dirt and saying, oh, look, there's 6 people in here. And one's a Neanderthal, and one's a short-faced bear, and they look related. But at the same time, yeah, it's gonna be really fascinating, let alone to see what's under the dirt and what's physically here that, we're so poised, we're so fixed on, we want to see something big, we want to see a picture, we want to see an explanation, we want to see something, when we know that there are people who have been here over 13,000 years, right? So we don't even know what to look for. So I think it's harder for us to imagine wanting to see the answers. Because
you just wonder what happened to this hill over the 30,000 years, as far as human activity.
Yeah. And there's no way that people pre that period weren't walking here, except for that glacier part. Prior to that,
could have been a problem.
Yeah. Well, we've been doing pretty good here, but how do we wrap this up then? Since the sun is setting.
Sun is setting.
And we want to thank everybody for being in here. But at the same time, I mean, Dennis, we've been out. There's a lot of things that everyone's going to see in the next coming months of what we've been able to film from you generously letting us on the site, your knowledge, your experience, the history here. It's been incredible. But for everyone watching, thank you for joining. But for your help to help us keep bringing this out there for everyone to re-educate K through 12 alone, despite various opinions from here to Galt. There's a lot of history that people need to hear about. And it's not just 6,000 or, like you said, 4,000 years of Indian history. That, well, Serpent Mound is at least 33. There's culture 3,300, 4,000 years ago. There's the stick culture, by the way, of the Grand Canyon. They crawl up into those caves 1,000 feet off the floor, 500 feet. And all they know is that some culture, which has no oral tradition, made little stick people. And they know that it's at least 3,300 years ago.
And thank God for the climate there. They didn't rot like
Right.
they did in New England, you know, very
Right.
dry, I guess. Yeah, yeah.
These could be
That's a problem here. Yeah, we do lose.
right?
So, but we'll make sure that we have the links for American Stonehenge in the description so everybody can come check it out. If you're in the area, definitely come here. It's amazing.
Yep. And we'll get out more docs. We'll be talking about it in the weeks to come. You guys are also gonna, if you'd like, there will be tickets ultimately available on Not Aliens, and I will be lecturing here again on September 24th. That is not too far away, actually. What am I thinking? That's 2 months away.
That's the next season. Yeah, it's the equinox.
Yeah. Anything else for everyone, Lynn?
No, thank you guys just for hanging in here, for all your amazing questions. As always, you guys are fantastic. Thank you, Michael, for being here with us. It was so
Thank
fun.
you for having me,
Oh.
of course.
Yes, and thanks for going in the chamber with me today,
Hey,
unlike some
And
people.
and before all of you check out, Michael is going to be live here in a couple hours. So if you, Michael, tell everybody where you're going to be.
I'll be over at DarkHour Paranormal interviewing Brian Minnick of the Dark Files. We're going to be going over the more mysterious ends of Montauk, New York. We will touch upon Camp Hero just slightly, but I think we're going to be more encompassed within the peripheral anomalies that are seen within Montauk. So that'll be at 11 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time, 8 o'clock p.m. Pacific Time.
And that will be very shortly.
Indeed.
Yeah. All right, everybody. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.